All right, let me call our June 2011 meeting of the Federal Communications Commission to order. Madam Secretary, please introduce our agenda for this morning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning to you. Good morning, Commissioners. Today's agenda includes one item for your consideration and two presentations. First, you will consider a report and order that enables all carriers that file tariffs with the Commission to do so electronically, thereby streamlining their filing processes, while also making tariff information more readily accessible to other carriers and the public. Second on the agenda, you will hear the Chief of the Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau and the Assistant Administrator of Federal Emergency Management Agency, or FEMA, give a presentation regarding the emergency alert system. Last on your agenda today, you will hear a presentation on the impact of technology on the information needs of communities. This is your agenda for today. The first item will be presented by the Wireline Competition Bureau. Sharon Gillett, Chief of the Bureau, will give the introduction.
Thank you, Madam Secretary, and Ms. Gillett, the floor is yours.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. I'm pleased to present this report in order, which is part of the Commission's Data Innovation Initiative, enables all tariff filers to file their tariffs and associated filings electronically through the Commission's Electronic Tariff Filing System, or ETFS. I would like to thank the team involved in preparing this order for all their contributions and hard work. Seated with me are Christy Schumann, Associate Bureau Chief, Al Lewis, Pricing Policy Division Chief, and Pam Arluk, Pricing Policy Assistant Division Chief. In addition to them, the following staff from the Pricing Policy Division contributed to this order: Lynn Engeldow, Jim Litchford, Randolph Smith, Eugene Gold, Steve Funkhauser, Vienna Jordan, Geneva Butler, and Todd Mitchell. I will now turn it over to Pam Arluk to present the order. Pam?
This report and order adopts rule revisions enabling all tariff filers to file tariffs and associated documents through the ETFS. This will benefit the public, carriers, and the Commission by streamlining the processes through which tariffs are filed and creating a more efficient, open, and transparent flow of information. Carriers file publicly with the Commission the rates, terms, and conditions of certain interstate and international telecommunications services they offer. Historically, these filings have been on paper and later on discs or CD-ROM. Electronic filing of tariffs over the Internet has been successfully in place for incumbent local exchange carriers since 1998. This item, for the first time, will enable the electronic filing of tariffs for all carriers that file tariffs with the Commission. Specifically, it will expand electronic filing to non-dominant carriers, such as competitive local exchange carriers. All filers will now be required to follow the Commission's rules for electronic filing of tariffs, tariff revisions, and associated documents, including applications for special permission. The order also clarifies and makes more consistent certain technical rules related to tariff filings. For example, it requires all tariff filers to comply with existing tariff composition and formatting rules, which will enable a more efficient review and comparison of tariff provisions. Finally, to provide a smooth transition to electronic filing, the rule revisions adopted in the order will become effective 120 days after the order is published in the Federal Register or after approval by the Office of Management and Budget, whichever date is later. Tariff filers will then have a 60-day window in which to file their first electronic tariff. The Bureau respectfully requests that the Commission adopt this item and requests editorial privileges. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me ask my colleagues if they have any comments on this item. Commissioner Cobbs?
I think this is a great step forward to apply this requirement, really apply this opportunity to all of the carriers who are submitting tariffs and tariff-related documents to the Commission. It's also a good indication that as we seek to extend the tools of the digital age to every citizen in the land, that we're keeping pace here at the FCC. We're long overdue to address some of these areas, but with items like this, I think we're making real progress. I think the Commission is making a lot of effort with a lot of success to make the information we collect easily available and usable by the public. We're here to serve, so my thanks to everybody in the Bureau and also the Office of Managing Director for bringing us this action today.
Thank you very much, Commissioner McDowell.
Sorry, I didn't know he was going to finish that quickly. Thank you, Commissioner Copps. Yeah, that's to help the average for the day, is to bring down the average. As a general matter, I support efforts to streamline commission procedures to make them more efficient for both the government and the public. This order achieves that goal. It makes good sense that non-dominant carriers be required to follow the same electronic tariff filing system that incumbent local exchange carriers have used for years. So after today's order goes into effect, gone are the days of relying on an antiquated process of filing tariffs on physical paper and diskettes. At least the filing process of the tariff system will be modernized. On that note, I hope that in the future the Commission will look beyond reforming the filing procedures and also consider whether the day will ever come when we can discard the tariff system overall. In fact, I propose that the Commission initiate a proceeding to examine whether, how, and when we could accomplish such a goal. If history is to be our guide, we are likely to find that markets and innovation have moved beyond the regulatory structures of the past. I thank the Wireline Competition Bureau, the staff, and everybody for their diligence on this order. Also, I commend the Chairman for his leadership in finding ways to modernize the Commission's data collection procedures overall, and I look forward to working with all of my colleagues on streamlining other cumbersome and outdated FCC procedures. That's dramatic foreshadow to something else we're going to talk about today. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Clyburn.
Thank you. Consumers, carriers, and this agency stand to benefit from an electronic tariff filing system that's available online. An easier administrative process that all carriers must use will be more efficient and effective. It will save time, money, and trees, and ultimately should result in better service. This is another example of a good government result from an agency that is focused on encouraging broadband deployment, adoption, and use. I would like to thank the staff for their work on this item, which I expect will be a welcome and universally embraced improvement to many who frequently work with and rely upon tariffs. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Clyburn. And thank you, team, for presenting this. Harnessing the power of technology to improve and make more efficient the operations of the FCC has been a priority for me from the day that I got here. It was something that I mentioned in my first address to staff. Moving government processes from paper to digital and from offline to online is essential to this commitment. And it's important for a series of reasons. Obviously, it drives process efficiencies and reduces costs for both private sector actors and for government. It also, moving information online, empowers third parties, apps developers, consumers to use public data in innovative ways. And together, that helps drive broadband adoption by creating yet more utility to broadband. It's why we've kept on coming back to this theme and why we'll keep on coming back to this theme. Over the last 2 years, thanks to the excellent leadership of our Managing Director, Steve Van Rokel, our Bureau Chiefs, and we have Sharon Gillett here today, our Data Innovation Team, which we started and is doing such great work, we've made substantial progress on this agenda. We've shifted toward electronic notification of docket filing and fees, moved filings on privacy policies, international telephone traffic from paper to digital, and made all information associated with docketed proceedings available electronically. Today, we take another step to modernize the Commission's processes by enabling all carriers to file tariffs in digital form over the internet rather than by paper or CDs. This reform will have several specific benefits. It'll make it easier for carriers to comply with their obligations. It will allow state and federal officials, the public, the media, easier and more transparent access to tariff filings, and it'll help the Commission conduct industry analysis more efficiently and effectively, and as Commissioner Clyburn pointed out, it will save trees. the number of trees we've saved so far in the last 2 years at the Commission and filing space is actually quite impressive. Going forward, I've directed our bureaus and offices to review their processes for further opportunities to move from paper to digital and integrate digital technologies into the way we do our business here at the FCC. I've also asked Ruth Milkman, our new special counsel for innovation and government, more on that later, to coordinate this effort and act as quickly as we can to get this job done. Thank you, Sharon and the team from the Wireline Bureau who worked on this. We appreciate your work, and we know you'll be back with a number of items, both with respect to Commission operations and also with respect to Commission policy, and we thank you for your work. With that, let's proceed to a vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. The ayes have it. So ordered, and the request for editorial privileges is granted. Thank you very much. And Madam Secretary, please announce the next item on our agenda.
Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, second on your agenda, Rear Admiral Jamie Barnett, Chief of the Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau, and Damon Penn, Assistant Administrator of FEMA, will give a presentation regarding the Emergency Alert System.
Thank you, Admiral Barnett. I'm going to give you the floor in a minute, but I do want to welcome our partners from FEMA. Damon Penn, Assistant Administrator, thank you for coming here this morning to help with this presentation. And also, I've lost your name, Mark Pease. Pies. Piesy.
I practiced with him before we started.
Piesy. From the National Weather Service. Thank you both for coming. Admiral Barnett, thank you for your ongoing work in this very important area, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. I'm proud to be before you with Damon Penn, my friend and colleague, Assistant Administrator of the Federal Emergency Management Agency for National Continuity Programs, to brief you on this initiative, and in fact with my friend and colleague, Mark Piese, Director of the Office of Operations Systems for the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, the National Weather Service, who's been another key partner in the emergency alerting system. On November 9 of this year at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, the Commission, FEMA, and NOAA will conduct the first ever top-to-bottom nationwide test of the Emergency Alert System, EAS. While EAS has been around for many years, this is the first nationwide test. A nationwide test is essential to ensuring the EAS functions as it's intended during an emergency. As we've repeatedly learned during recent disasters such as the earthquake and tsunami in Japan, as well as the tornadoes and floods that have devastated various parts of our country, a reliable and effective emergency alert system is key to ensuring the safety of our citizens during a time of disaster. So first, let me provide some background on EAS. The EAS is an alerting system which relies on media-based communications. It's designed to transmit emergency alerts and warnings to the American public at the national, state, and local levels. The EAS has been in existence since 1994, though its antecedents have been around since the 50s. Broadcasters, satellite, radio, satellite television service providers, as well as cable television and wireline video providers all participate in this system. These EAS participants provide tremendous public service by transmitting thousands of alerts and warnings to the public each year regarding weather threats, child abductions, and many other types of emergencies. The slide that you see displayed shows how the present-day EAS reaches the public. EAS is a hierarchical message distribution system. An alert may be issued by an authorized official at the national, state, or local level, initiating a specially encoded message to a broadcast station-based network that in turn delivers the message to individual EAS participants. If public safety officials need to send an alert or warning to a large region of the United States or even the entire country, we need to know that the system will work as intended. Only a top-down, simultaneous test of all components of EAS can provide an appropriate diagnosis of a system-wide performance. We, along with our federal partners, wanted to conduct the first national test as soon as possible. However, we felt it was prudent to conduct the test when hurricane season was nearing its end and before the severe winter weather season begins in earnest. After consultation with EAS participants, we chose November 9 to avoid the holiday rush, and we chose 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to minimize any disruption during rush hours. After this first test, a periodic national test will likely be routine and may come at different times, just like the weekly and monthly tests do now. The beauty of EAS that it's designed to work when other methods of disseminating emergency alerts are unavailable. And while there's no guarantee that other communication methods will withstand major disasters, various elements of the EAS are being designed to withstand such calamities. The Bureau will soon release a public notice officially announcing the date and time of the first nationwide EAS test. In addition, the Bureau has begun meetings with FEMA and EAS participant stakeholders to begin dialogue to resolve any operational issues in advance of the test. The Bureau is also working to develop a dedicated website that will provide information about the test to the public. I'd like to thank several people at the FCC, FEMA, and NOAA for their hard work on these issues. And specifically, I'd like to acknowledge our Deputy Bureau Chief, Lisa Folks. She's the Deputy Bureau Chief for Cybersecurity, Communication, Reliability, and Alerting. Also Greg Cook, Aaron Ehrenreich, Bonnie Gay, Tom Beers, of course Damon Penn, Manny Centeno, Wade Whitmer, Antoine Johnson, Ann Buckingham at FEMA, and Mark Paese and John Sokich of NOAA, and also Eric Panketh for all of their work on these emergency alerting issues. And now I'd like to turn it over to Damon Penn of FEMA.
Well, thank you, Jamie. Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, thank you for the opportunity to be with you today. And as Jamie said, it's really a great day for FEMA and the FCC to be able to jointly announce the national test of the EAS. Partnership has been firm, and coupled with that, with Mark and his efforts at NOAA, I think it really produced a vital service to the American people. And thanks to all those that are gathered for recognizing the importance of alerts and warnings, and for your continued support of the Integrated Public Alert and Warning System, also known as IPAWS. I'd like to talk briefly, if I could, about how EAS fits into IPAWS, and what our vision looks like for the future of public alerts and warnings. As many of you know, our program's really hit stride over the past 2 years, and again, that's been really due to our partnership with the FCC and our relationships that we've built with the industry. But we've established common alert protocols as a standard. Now our outreach programs and our relationships have made a turnaround for our program overall. So as I describe IPAWS and how it helps us reach more of the American population if an emergency occurs, I want to first ensure you that EAS remains a critical element in alerting the public. We completed 2 preliminary tests, as Jamie mentioned, in Alaska, and we found that the system functions as advertised. We, of course, learned some technical lessons and we modified some procedures, but we have a basic understanding and a basic agreement that the system will work as it has been advertised. We've shared our findings with the FCC and with broadcasters, and in November we'll show the American public that we all have the courage to conduct an end-to-end nationwide test of the system. And from there we'll evaluate the outcomes, we'll take steps to correct the deficiencies, and we'll move forward from there. But without a test, we're all simply hoping that the system will work as planned. As we reanalyzed in general the task given to us at FEMA of alerting the American public, we quickly realized that accomplishing the task was more complex than the old Conelrad beginnings that it had in the 1950s. Alerting the public needs to include multiple means and methods. It needs to be at all levels of government, and it needs to reach all of the American public. So when we decided how we would, we also decided that we needed a way to include technology and to use ideas that already exist, and that we needed a way to incorporate emerging technologies. So we threw out the concept that we had of a requirements-based approach, and we really developed an applications-based approach. So when we apply this approach to IPAWS, the FEMA aggregator becomes a device that we can now use to exercise our existing capabilities, but we open IPAWS to countless other applications that we've not even considered. So we abandoned the my way or the highway approach and pushed for the Common Alert Protocol standard. And once that was approved, that allows us to show the leadership of the nation that we're looking much further into the future, and that we're setting a standard for interoperability and for all our alerts and warnings equipment. Now if a vendor wants to develop a piece of equipment, he can bring it to us for testing and certification, and emergency managers can know in peace of mind that the equipment is compatible with any message that the federal government may send, and any message that they want to generate at their level. And we've opened up the opportunity for the development of countless new methods of alerting and warning to the American people at the same time. So the potential is boundless. Now we can take emerging siren technology in the Midwest, for example, and incorporate that. We can incorporate signage initiatives in the Southeast. We can include the internet. CMAS can be maximized for the potential it has for cell phones and reach community in that method. And then we can also reach out to the community with disabilities and use existing devices that they have, just to name a few. And of course, people listening to radio and TV will still be notified by EAS. To give you an idea of the potential and how it's extended beyond some of our wildest dreams, NOAA is helping us develop a capability to integrate their systems with several predictive databases. Using an industrial accident as an example, we're testing methods where a computer can generate a downwind hazard plume, isolate the households affected, and send multiple messages to affected communities with instructions on how to protect themselves. As another example, National Public Radio developed technology that can take one of our text messages and instantaneously translate it through a voice synthesizer to a Braille reader. So the sky and imagination are only the limits that we have to how we can alert the public to imminent danger. So to close, again, thank you, Commissioner, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Commissioners, for your support of IPAWS, and in particular, thanks to Jamie and his team, Lisa, Greg, Eric, Tom, David, Bonnie, Tom, Jeffrey, and Naki for helping us make this a reality and taking a great step forward. So thank you, sir.
Thanks, sir.
Thank you.
We weren't letting Mark talk today. He's saving his voice for hurricane season.
Good.
but he is available to your questions. So.
Well, thank you to all of you. Let me ask if any of my colleagues have any comments. Commissioner Cobbs?
I think it's great good news that we're actually going to do a test of this system. It's a national challenge, but also a national opportunity to develop a system that we are going to increasingly rely on to deal with national crises and weather emergencies and man-made emergencies and Amber Alerts that save abducted children. And I really want to highlight two things. I want to commend the public-private partnership that is behind this. You mentioned all of the stakeholders and all the participants in this, and it's a pretty wide range of folks. So getting them all working together and coordinated and pulling together for the common good here is admirable, and I congratulate you on that. Our policies work best we can do that. When we can do that, we found that out during the DTV transition just a couple of years ago. I also want to commend the interagency coordination that you've done here with Damon and Mark and others too. This is such an urgent priority, and we have to have absolutely seamless coordination and cooperation when you're talking about coping with disasters like the ones that we have coped with in recent months and in recent years too. So I want to commend that interagency cooperation that you've done here, and I want to particularly commend Admiral Barnett for doing the same thing in many other issues that are under your office and under the Bureau. So I think that's commendable and a wonderful example for all of us as we seek to protect our people in the 21st century. So I thank you for a good item. I wish you luck in the test. Obviously, we'll run into some problems and we'll see some glitches, but you're already learning from the Alaska experience. I think that's great, and I think we'll learn a lot from this one too. So I'm enthused and happy you're here.
Thank you. Commissioner McDowell?
Just to echo the words of my distinguished colleague, that as I've traveled the country in the past 5 years that I've served on the commission, I have heard frequently from broadcasters and public safety officials, et cetera, the need to do exactly what you're doing. So this, I think, is actually a historic step. We're going to learn a lot, and we're going to make a lot of great progress here, and it's going to help protect the citizenry and the resources of our great nation. So thank you for doing what you're doing, and we look forward. This is an iterative process, so we look forward to learning from it and hearing more about what comes about as a result and how we can learn and always do better. So thank you.
Great. Thank you. Commissioner Clyburn?
I commend the staff of the Public Safety, Homeland, and Community also, but Security Bureau, NOAA, FEMA, and others for the hard work and coordination necessary to conduct this first ever top-to-bottom nationwide test of the emergency alert system. The goal is that all Americans, if they are turning into their favorite TV or radio station at 2 p.m. on November 9th, should be able to see or hear this test alert. Those like me, who hail from states vulnerable to hurricanes, know all too well the value of timely communications during emergencies. Therefore, I am glad that under the leadership of Chairman Genachowski and Admiral Barnett, that this commission is doing all that it can to ensure that all Americans have access to and rely on the national EAS system. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. I want to echo a couple of points. One, on interagency coordination. It's symbolic that we have here not only Admiral Barnett from our team, but FEMA and the National Weather Service, because we know that proper emergency alerting and response in the country can't happen without effective, efficient interagency coordination. And just the three of you here, as we know, reflects a tremendous amount of interagency coordination that occurs on a regular basis, and that includes agencies that aren't represented here today. That's a big deal. I commend everyone for working together on this and doing it in the spirit that's reflected by the presentations today. A second point is that this, as Commissioner McDowell said, this is historic, and in fact, we're in the middle of what I believe is developing to be a time of a series of historic steps when it comes to emergency alerting and response. So this specific test, the first top-to-bottom test of EAS of the sort, is itself historic. But the other steps that were touched upon today, and some that weren't, are also part of a full set of initiatives that are targeted at making sure we are harnessing modern technology to communicate with people in the way that is effective in times of emergency. And so what we all grew up with, the traditional EAS system, remains very important, but can no longer be the only way that we seek to alert people. And the work that's been done in the last several months on PLAN, the mobile alerting service, is a very important part of this puzzle. The interoperability, Mr. Penn, that you mentioned in the systems and protocols is a very important historical development. The progress that we're now making on getting a national interoperable mobile broadband public safety network up and running. Yesterday, the Senate Commerce Subcommittee, or full committee, approved important legislation in this area. Next generation 911, where there's still a lot of work to do, but it is now a matter that is being actively pursued, and another area where I believe we can make progress of historical significance. So for all of that, on behalf of the public, we are grateful to the work that you're doing, and we know that the EAS test is extremely important. And again, I think one of the most impressive things of the presentation is that you're thinking about the EAS test not in a vertical silo, unrelated to other emergency alerting mechanisms, but that you're thinking about the whole playing field. And that makes complete sense, because from the perspective of a citizen, an ordinary person, you just want to make sure that when you need to be alerted about something that's going wrong, that there's a way to reach you wherever you are efficiently, so that you have information that you can act on and save lives, protect your family. So very appreciative of this presentation. Thank you again to Admiral Barnett and your great staff, to FEMA, to the National Weather Service. We look forward to further reports and all the good work that you're doing on this. Thank you.
Thanks, sir.
Madam Secretary, our next item, please.
The final item on your agenda today is a presentation on the impact of technology on the information needs of communities.
Mr. Waldman, before I turn it over to Steve Waldman for his presentation, let me say a few words of introduction. In 2009, a bipartisan commission of the Knight Foundation looked at how technology is changing the media landscape and affecting the information needs of communities. The Knight Commission called on the FCC to examine some of the issues more closely, and I asked Steve Waldman to come to the commission to lead a working group to do so, to assess the landscape, identify trends, and make recommendations on how the information needs of communities can best be met in a broadband world. Today, I'm proud to say that they have completed and delivered their report. The Project Share, Steve Waldman is here to present the key findings and recommendations of the staff report. But before I turn it over to Steve, a few brief comments about the process and Steve's remarkable team. Anyone who reads this report will be impressed by the thoughtfulness of its analysis and its recommendations. The report's findings and recommendations contain a strong and hopeful through line. There has never been a more exciting time than this broadband age to achieve our founders' vision of a free democracy with a free press and informed and empowered citizens. As the report identifies and celebrates the potential of new communications technologies, it also highlights important gaps that threaten to limit that potential. The report does all this in a thoughtful and fact-based way with a full grasp of the opportunities of new technologies, as well as deep respect for long-established forms of media. That the report deserves this description is no surprise given Steve Waldman's impressive, diverse, unique background. Steve worked for many years as a highly respected reporter and editor at publications including Newsweek and U.S. News and World Report. He's also a successful internet entrepreneur, having created an online multi-faith community that had millions of Americans as regular users, and he also wrote for WallStreetJournal.com. Steve was the ideal person to lead the effort on this report, and on behalf of all of us, I thank you, Steve, for your service. Of course, this was a real group effort within the agency, a great example of collaboration across departments. I'm grateful to all the FCC staff who worked on this, often squeezing in time on top of their other responsibilities. I want to especially note Elizabeth Andrion, the Deputy Chief of our Office of Strategic Planning, Cheryl Ismail, Senior Counsel, Tamara Smith, Senior Advisor at OSP, for their extraordinary work. I also want to note, just to lead into Steve's presentation, that Steve attracted an impressive collection of outside journalists, academics, and scholars to help develop the report. These include Professor James Hamilton of Duke, Ellen Goodman of Rutgers, Peter Shane of Ohio State, Cynthia Kennard of USC Annenberg. The team conducted more than 600 in-depth interviews with a very diverse range of people from across the country, held multiple public hearings, made numerous site visits to newsrooms across the country, analyzed scores of studies, and reviewed and compiled more than 1,100 comments from the general public. The Commission takes pride in this process and in the final product. With that, Steve, I would like to turn it over to you to present your findings and recommendations. The floor is yours, and please take your time.
Thank you very much, Chairman. It really has been a great honor to work on this project at the FCC with this great staff and with the Commission. As you mentioned, this project was launched at the beginning of 2010 when it was very clear that we were in a time of rapid and seismic change in the media world. And you had, on the one hand, a tremendous innovation, digital innovation everywhere and every day, and at the same time you had newspapers closing, staffs being laid off, and the traditional media going through a very serious contraction. So the idea was to therefore take a good hard look at this and really try to answer two basic questions. One is, are citizens and communities getting the news, information, and reporting that they need and want? And secondly, is policy, both at the FCC and other bodies, in sync with the nature of modern media markets, especially when it comes to encouraging innovation and advancing public interest goals? The process, as you mentioned, we created a informal working group that basically demanded some extracurricular time from many people at the agency across many departments. as well as bringing in some really outstanding outside experts to help. We did more than 600 interviews, and it was really a very wide range of people we interviewed. Media executives, reporters, civic leaders, foundations, investors, conservatives, liberals, old media, new media, really a very broad range. We had 2 public workshops, public comments, and very significantly, we also did a very careful literature review because we were not the first ones to study this issue. There were some other really very outstanding studies and reports that we made great use of. As you mentioned, we were very fortunate to have a really outstanding team, and you mentioned the key folks, Elizabeth Andrea and Shereel Ismail, James Hamilton, Ellen Goodman, Peter Shane, Cynthia Kennard, and Tamara Smith, who worked from beginning to end and around the clock on this. We also, as you said, had people from throughout the agency working on this. I'm not going to read all the names as we would use up all the time there, but you can see that it really, we had contributions from every department, which is fitting for the nature of the modern media landscape, which is not siloed in the traditional ways that the agency is divided up. We made very aggressive use of free labor and interns, and counting on other people when they really had too much other work to do. And this was really a very gratifying process. I have to say, of all the exciting moments of this, the most gratifying moment in the entire process was when one of the folks on the staff, and I won't mention his name, who had said the first 4 drafts were horrible, said the 5th draft was pretty good. And I knew we were finally ready to release. Just starting with basics, the first principle that actually has to guide all this is the First Amendment. This infuses a lot of what we talk about. It certainly infuses the way we approach the recommendations. As a journalist, obviously I take that very seriously, that while we care very deeply about what's happening with journalism, we also have the First Amendment as the basic parameter for how we approach this, both in terms of guaranteeing freedom and placing limits on the government's intervention. Now, the way the report is structured, and by the way, the report is now live on the website, is a major section on the media landscape, which is basically a description of what's happening in the landscape right now. We broke that further into sections on commercial media, nonprofit media, non-media institutions, by which we mean there are lots of ways that people get very important civic information that don't go through the media. Emergency alerts, for instance, libraries, schools, government websites, and those are increasingly important ways that people get information. Then we took a very hard look at policy, including the FCC's policies and track record, and I'm very proud, really, of the Commission for allowing basically I think a pretty tough self-assessment of the FCC. I think that speaks well to the Commission and its desire to get it right. And then we have recommendations. The recommendations are not only for the FCC. We obviously took the FCC recommendations very seriously, but we also spoke about possible ways that other players in the media landscape can help. The main findings, in a nutshell, are that, first, most of the media landscape is actually very, very vibrant. Tremendous amount of innovation. We'll go into more depth about that, but that is a central point. And yet, at the same time that you have that, there are some serious issues, and especially the one that we keep coming back to over and over again is what we believe is a shortage of local accountability reporting. And since I'm going to use this word accountability reporting a bunch of times, I should define it. This is basically things like covering City Hall, covering the school board, the State House, the basic civic institutions, holding those institutions accountable, finding out the basic information that citizens need. So I think that we're actually at a really interesting moment where ignoring these ailments will mean really serious harm to communities. But paying attention to them will mean that we will actually be able to create, I believe, the best media system that we've ever had. And I know that sounds like hyperbole, but I think when you consider the tremendous advantages that have happened, if we can preserve those and address the very serious gaps, we're really going to be in a very exciting moment. So first, let's just talk about some of the basic backdrop that helps us understand what went on the contraction of the traditional media. It was sometimes said that, newspapers would have been in a better position if they had just grown their web traffic. And, if it were only that easy. The truth is that from 2005 to 2009, newspapers' online web traffic doubled. And digital ad revenue grew $716 million, which sounds like a very big sum until you hear that at the same time they lost $22.6 billion in newspaper ad revenue. And this led to the common saying in the newspaper business that print dollars were being replaced by digital dimes. And if you look at the numbers hard, it's really print dollars being replaced by digital pennies. And that is really the nut of the problem, is that it's very hard to outrun the losses in the traditional business models at this point through ad-based internet page views. So what are the implications of this? We ended up really focusing a lot on a very nitty-gritty subject, which is staff. What happens in newsrooms when these kinds of revenue contractions happen? And it's a really distressing set of numbers when you look at what's happened with traditional media. Newspaper staffing is down by about 25% just in the last few years, which means it's now down to the level that newspapers had before Watergate. TV network news staffs are down by half since the 1980s. News magazine, where I used to work, down by half since the 1980s. And if you look at particular communities to see how this plays out in different communities, you see the impact. So a study by Pew, which has done some of the best work in this area of Baltimore, they looked at the Baltimore Sun. Baltimore Sun produced 32% fewer stories in 2009 than 10 years earlier. Philadelphia, a different group looked at Philadelphia, comparing 2006 to 2009, and they said available news about public affairs issues has dramatically diminished over the last 3 years by many measures: news hole, airtime, story count, and keyword measurements. If you look at a particular newsroom, the News and Observer in Raleigh, in 2004 they had 250 newsroom employees. By 2011 they had 103. It doesn't take a lot of imagination to see that that can have a really serious impact. And specifically, some of the beats that lost reporters: courts, schools, legal affairs, agriculture, environment, state education, fundamental issues of concern to citizens and to the health of American communities. State houses. From 2003 to 2008, while spending by state governments went up by about 20%, the number of people covering state governments went down by a third. That's not a good formula if you're concerned about safeguarding taxpayer dollars. Investigative reporting is down. Now, this is it's a squishy term, and it's a little bit hard to come up with numbers that are, exactly pinpoint this, but two clues. Membership in the Investigative Reporters and Editors Association, 2003 was 5,300, now it's 4,000. The number of submissions for the public service category in the Pulitzer Prizes dropped 43% from 1984 to 2010. Coverage of Washington, the Washington bureaus. 27 states have no Washington reporters. The number of papers with bureaus are down by about a half since the 1980s. Religion coverage, a topic very dear to my heart. When I checked back in with the religion news writers and said, what's happened in the last year? They said, religion news at the local level is nearly gone, which is very sad because the previous 10 years had been a period of real growth in that area. Hamsterization. This is a term that the Columbia Journalism School referred to a Columbia Journalism Review, wrote an article about the hamster wheel. And this is basically the phenomenon of reporters who now have, in addition to their regular beat, they have a second beat, and they write for the website, and they tweet, and now they're learning how to do video. And it creates a little bit of a sense that they feel like they're hamsters on a wheel. Well, since I work at the federal government, I decided to bureaucratize the phrase a little bit, and we are now referring to this as hamsterization. And this is the process of when you don't necessarily eliminate a beat. It's not like there's no one there covering it, but reporters are stretched. And it means, to use a different metaphor, if you're talking about a media landscape, there are still reporters who can look at the media landscape and describe what is there, but they have less and less time to turn over the rocks and look in the shadows. And you can see in the case like of health reporting, a very important topic to Americans. The Kaiser Foundation did a study, and they said actually interest in health coverage is up, but the number of health reporters is down. And that they concluded that the result of that was a loss of in-depth enterprise stories. Education, again, they said, well, actually, there's lots of education reporters, but they're less ambitious and doing less depth. Same thing with local business reporters. Andrew Lack, the CEO of Bloomberg, said it is currently not a market well served. Now, I think this obviously has real harm to communities. It's wasted taxpayer dollars, corruption, worse schools. David Simon, who was a former reporter at the Baltimore Sun, who maybe is better known as the producer of Wired, at a Senate hearing said, it's going to be one of the great times to be a corrupt politician. And I was not there, so I don't know who he was looking at when he said that, but I thought it was probably a very exciting moment. Now, it's very hard to actually prove a negative in this case. You know, we're talking, the impact is on stories not written. So how do you prove that? How do you prove what the impact is? And we tried to get at this a couple different ways. We interviewed reporters about what are you doing now compared to what you used to do? What kinds of stories do you used to do that you can't do anymore? We looked at stories where there was journalism done after the crisis. So for instance, one of the worst mining disasters in recent years was the Upper Big Branch mine disaster in West Virginia. Some fantastic journalism was done after the disaster, finding that there were more than 1,300 mine violations on the books. So one can only imagine what might have happened, whether those 29 workers who died might not have suffered that fate if this journalism had done before the disaster, or if more of it had been done before. Bell, California is a great example where the LA Times eventually did a terrific piece about the chief administrative officer in a working class city in California who was being paid more than $787,000. Problem is that this was going on for 5 years, and because Bell had no one covering it, taxpayers racked up losses of $5.6 million. So we can only imagine if there had been a reporter there, whether or not taxpayers would have saved that. As often happens in situations like this, it tends to be, I think, the least powerful and most vulnerable who suffer the most. And we were very touched, I think, by people who talked about, not necessarily journalists, but people in communities who were on the front lines of trying to solve problems for communities, about what has happened to their lives and their effectiveness at solving community problems as this contraction has happened. So, for instance, an expert on the family court system in Michigan said, yeah, coverage has gotten smaller and smaller in the years. We asked, well, why does that matter? What's the impact? And he said, well, for example, parents whose rights are terminated, who shouldn't be terminated. It just takes somebody to go down there to get the story, but nobody is ever down there. One thing that surprised me a little bit is that because the internet and digital tools in general have been so empowering, and you can see this obviously in literally the effect of the internet on helping to topple governments, and in many ways in the ability to have users and citizens engage in the media, it has been a very empowering experience. So it surprised me a little bit that we found a countervailing shift in the other direction. And basically, when you don't have a sufficient accountability function in communities, it actually leads to a power shift in the other direction, toward institutions, toward government, away from citizens. And this is because reporters basically write from press releases more and don't have time to dig. So, for instance, Pew study of Baltimore reported, as news is posted faster, often with little enterprise reporting added, the official version of events is becoming more important. We found official press releases often appear word for word in first accounts of events, though not often noted as such. Government, at least in this study, initiates most of the news. So I've talked about newspapers so far in great depth because newspapers traditionally have played a special role in the ecosystems of communities and have tended to be the bulk of the reporting. So the contraction of newspapers has a special ripple effect. But of course, they're not the only players, and other media have played really essential roles. And I'm not going to go into quite as much depth of them, but I want to quickly go through. Radio used to actually play an important role providing repertorial resources in communities. And in some ways, radio is actually doing really well and thriving. National radio, public affairs, news, talk, is booming. It's a very vibrant area. At the same time, local news is not. There were 50 all-news stations, local radio stations in the mid-'80s. There are now 30, so only about a third of the population now has the benefit of an all-news radio station. The number of reporters who work for local news radio stations has been down. Or as the person who did the study on this said, the median number of people employed in a commercial radio newsroom has been 1 for quite a few years. TV news. I want to talk a little bit about TV news because this is a really very interesting and in some ways exciting time for local TV news. In many ways, local TV news is actually more productive than it has been perhaps ever. In the last 7 years, the number of hours of local TV news has risen by 35%. And they're increasingly doing very creative things. They're using their multicast channels more creatively. They're starting to do more mobile applications. They're doing user-generated content. It's really a great opportunity moment for local TV news. They're still the number one source of news. They have less of a market share than they used to, but they're still the number one source of news. They're increasingly an important source of online news. And the newspaper contraction actually creates an opportunity for them to do more of the local original reporting. Technology costs have gone down, so they would actually be able to hire more reporters. And they are relatively profitable, relatively meaning relative to everyone else in the community. They're not as profitable as they used to be, but actually they had a pretty good year. So in many ways, local TV news is really more important than ever. And I really want to highlight that, I actually, since I spent most of my time in the print world as a journalist, I can admit that there is sometimes a little bit of a snobbery on the part of print reporters towards local TV news. And I have to say, I don't agree with it because I've done mass circulation journalism and I've done narrow circulation journalism, and there's nothing harder and more valuable than coming up with really serious, substantial reporting and but packaging it in a way that is available and accessible to a very wide range of people. And the best local newscasts do that. They do investigative reporting. They do the news that is really heart and soul of what communities want and need. The next slide is an interesting one, and it's basically this is basically the volume of local news minutes on one axis, on the left axis, and then the market size on the bottom axis. And basically what you can see, in a way is not surprising, is that as you get to smaller markets, there's less local news being produced. And the economics of it become more challenging. So, of course, there's a lot of variation, as I think this points out, in local news. There are many that are really seizing the moment and doing very exciting things, but some are not. And I do believe that some local TV news operations are not seizing this opportunity. So we have a few problems. First, the old phrase, if it bleeds, it leads, is still true. Maybe even worse than ever. The beat system. Most TV stations used to have a beat system, kind of like newspapers. Less and less is that true, which means there's less expertise being developed. A study of the LA market showed that the result of these two phenomena was really, I think, a pretty shockingly small amount of time being spent on civically important information. Specifically, they said that a little over 1 minute of a typical half-hour newscast was going to education, healthcare, government, civically important topics like that. I think that possibly one of the most alarming things that we saw was something that we call pay for play. And these are basically situations where a station will allow an advertiser to dictate content. In some cases, it's an advertiser that literally says, yeah, you can have an ad deal, and all you have to do is promise that you only interview people from our hospital, or that you work off this story list that we've handily created for you. In one show, they actually were charging guests to appear on the show. Things like this, this is not the majority of stations by any means, but nonetheless, it's a really serious problem. And we had mixed evidence on whether or not it was merely persisting or whether it was growing. But in any event, it's a big deal. Another thing that worried us somewhat is that at the same time, the amount of TV news that is being produced is up by 35%. They actually did this while cutting staff on average at TV stations. Now, in some ways, there are some real legitimate efficiencies that have been built into the system that might have allowed them to do that. The term is one-man band, and that basically means you used to have a crew of a reporter and a sound/video person, or if it was a network show, you might have a 3 or 4 person crew. And one-man banding, as a result of the technology, the reporter can be the videographer, can be the camera person and the sound person as well. And in some ways, this is a fantastic development. I've talked to reporters who said, actually, this is great. For one thing, I don't have a whole crew with me, so I can kind of, get into City Hall in a way that is less conspicuous than I used to. It makes me more mobile, makes me go more places. And a number of people said, this could be a fantastic development because instead of having 20 reporters and 20 crew, we could have 40 reporters. Well, that's not what's actually happened. Instead of having 20 reporters and 20 crew, we have 20 reporters, or maybe 18 reporters. And so as a result, the reporters are doing more. In addition to doing the reporting, they're doing the shooting and the audio and filing for the website and tweeting. In some cases, this really works well. Again, I want to make it clear, I'm not actually of the view that this is an inherently bad thing. I just don't think that many stations have used the savings and efficiencies that have developed from this to seize the opportunity that they had in local markets. Now, I've just offered some criticisms of local TV news, but it should be said, even the ones that I've been talking about are at least doing local programming. We looked at the question of, well, are there stations that are doing no local programming at all? There was a limit to how granular we could get on this, but we did, through 3 different analytical approaches, take a look at this, and they all kind of came out in the same direction, which is that about 21% of stations do no local news. And if you add in stations that do 30 minutes or less, that's about 1/3 of the stations. Now, I am offering no comment on whether that's good, bad, or indifferent. I think it really somewhat depends on the situation. It is not necessarily obvious that we would all be better off if every station in America did local news. But it is nonetheless, I think, an interesting phenomenon and one of importance to the FCC to understand this, that not all stations do local programming. So we've been talking about the contraction of the old media. So 2 points. First of all, 2 years ago when you talk about the old media, the traditional media, there was a real kind of bifurcation between the old guys and the new guys. It's really not true anymore. Now the newspapers and the TV stations and the radio stations are doing really innovative things online too. They are the internet, just as much as they are print things. So that's a distinction that's getting blurred, and despite my use of this kind of glib phrase. And the second thing is that this is just part of the story. If all these contractions happened, but they were being filled in by the growth of the new media, we'd be in great shape. So that was obviously a central question for this, is we know there's a tremendous amount of innovation and activity. Where is it filling in the gaps? Where is it not filling in the gaps? So I'm not going to go into, we could spend the entire time talking about the incredible bounty of innovation that has happened as a result of the internet. I'll try to summarize them. I think we all have a sense of them. But lower barriers to entry, the vast amount of space online has led to greater diversity of voices, increased depth for many types of coverage. There's sometimes this, I think, idea that, oh yeah, well the internet's good at providing a way for people to mouth off with uninformed opinions. No, the internet provides the opportunity for tremendous depth. Technology has reduced the costs of gathering news, producing news, and distributing news. In some cases, substantially. Whether you're talking about computerized databases that enable someone to do a story in 2 hours that might have taken 2 weeks previously, or the cost of publishing images or video, or the most obvious one of all, which is you can use a search engine to find things out that used to take you 3 days to find out. Citizens are empowered. I think it's very telling that if you think about, what are the most searing news images, say, of the 1960s and 70s, say, from the Vietnam War, and some images come to mind. And there were images shot by brave, courageous, professional photographers. Probably the most searing image of that sort we have now is the image of a Iranian martyr being shot because she was protesting. This image was shot by someone's cell phone, a doctor, a citizen. And that gives you a sense of the potential power of user-generated content. We've also seen an explosion of new websites. A lot of the ones that get the most attention in the ink are on the national level: Huffington Post, the Daily Caller, Politico. There are many, many others. Really also very exciting stuff happening on the local level. MinPost, Texas Tribune, Bay Citizen, Chicago News Cooperative. These are names that I think you are going to be hearing more and more of. These are entrepreneurs who were concerned about what was going on in their community, saw a gap, and moved to try to fit it. Some are for-profits, some are non-profits, but they've brought tremendous energy. Some are even becoming self-sufficient and profitable. As I said earlier, these are attributes, these are tools that are no longer just limited to what we call web native businesses. They're bleeding into all sorts of different media. Maybe one of the areas that is most obvious is hyperlocal news. I mean, hyperlocal news is hyperlocal is kind of a buzzword. Well, it actually is a word that had to be invented anew because it didn't exist before, or at least it didn't exist in the same way that it is happening now. That's because the media models were such that it just, even in the fattest, happiest days of newspapers, they could not get granular down to a house-by-house, block-by-block level. It just was not economic. Now, you had weeklies and you had things like that, but hyperlocal information has gotten more vibrant than it has ever been. Now, a lot of these are not big commercial enterprises. They're civic enterprises, and they're not profitable, but they don't have to be. This is sort of civic enterprise, 1,000 points of journalism sprouting up in communities around the country. Now, this year, in 2010, as a result of all these changes, a major milestone was achieved, which was that this is the first year that more people got their news on the internet than through paper newspapers. And if you look at these two charts, which is an age breakdown, the left chart is the youngest cohort, and the right chart is the older cohort, you can see which way this is heading. So that is the story of abundance. But one of the counterintuitive things we found was that despite this abundance, it turns out you can have an abundance of media outlets and a shortage of reporting. So again, to return to Baltimore, where the most in-depth study was done, Pew looked at the number of outlets, and they found, yes, there's an enormous proliferation of ways that people can get their news, numbers of outlets, blogs, radio stations, newspapers. They counted 53 outlets that were doing real news. But then they did an interesting thing. They did a content analysis where they actually looked at the articles, looked at the stories on the TV news, and they said, what was actually the source of the reporting? And they discovered that most of it came from the Baltimore Sun and one of the TV stations. And by the way, as we said before, the Baltimore Sun's doing less than they used to be. So to use a metaphor of one scholar referred to this as the iron core of reporting. It's the iron core that can then be sculpted by others in the media food chain. But if the iron core is shrinking in mass, there's less to work with. And by the way, it wasn't just this Pew study that found this. There were several different studies looking at it from several different angles that came to the same conclusion. So we really came to the conclusion that on this one area of the local accountability reporting so far, the new media is not filling this key reporting gap. And this was really driven home to me once when I was at a conference put on by the Knight Foundation, which has really been taking a tremendous lead in funding and stimulating innovation in this area. And they brought together the dozen of the leading local news websites. These are the top, most influential, innovative, and mostly most well-financed of the new operations. And went around the table and they were describing what they were doing and how many reporters they were hiring, and then I counted them up and it says 88 reporters. Well, that's pretty good. It's pretty good until you consider the fact that 15,000 reporters have left newsrooms in the last decade. So it gives you a sense of scale. The energy is there, the excitement is there, the quality is there, the innovation is there, the scale is not. Another study from the Poynter Institute said that there has been a drop of $1.6 billion a year of spending from newspaper newsrooms. Foundations have been trying to make up some of the difference by pouring money into it, and in fact, one study said they've put in $180 million over 5 years. But that math tells you something. $1.6 billion per year out, $180 million over 5 years in. It's led people, experts in this area, including folks who I think are web evangelists, people who have very, very high optimism for the nature of the web, to conclude that there are some gaps that are not being filled. Michelle McClown, who did a comprehensive survey of these studies, said the tired idea that the born on the web news sites will replace traditional media is wrong-headed, and it's a pastime that academic research and news reports reflect that. Esther Dyson, who was a real pioneer and internet investor, said, news startups are rarely profitable. By and large, no thinking person who wanted a return on investment would invest in a news startup. I hope she's wrong. She hopes she's wrong. But that is her honest assessment of the current situation. Why is this? Some of it is what we refer to as the great unbundling. And this is something that I think we were not really conscious of before, but the internet has made us conscious of it. It turns out that when you were buying a newspaper, you were essentially subsidizing an elaborate cross-subsidy scheme developed by the newspaper. You were buying it because you may have wanted the box scores or the horoscopes, or maybe in your cases you actually wanted the detailed international coverage. But perhaps you were buying it for the box scores, but you were actually subsidizing the Baghdad Bureau or the City Hall Reporter. Now, you don't have to do that. You can go straight to the website that just has the box scores. And by the way, it's a better experience. They actually change minute by minute. I had a moment the other day when I was looking at a box score in a newspaper, and I just kept staring at it, waiting for the score to change because I had gotten used to that. It's a better experience online. So that cross-subsidy is gone. There was another cross-subsidy that was happening, or a bundling, which is on the advertising side. The ad executive, John Wanamaker, was quoted, and I was unable to determine whether this was apocryphal or not, but he's quoted so often saying this is, "My people tell me I'm wasting half my advertising budget, but they can't tell me which half." Now he knows which half. Now the precision of ad targeting, the precision of advertising metrics, enables any advertiser to know how many people are looking at the ad, how many people are clicking on the ad, whether it's the right demographic, how many people who have clicked on the ad are buying the product. It enables advertisers to be very, very efficient. So it has tremendous benefits for advertisers. But it is one of the main factors that has led to a decline in ad rates. Ad rates are online are a fraction of what they are offline. In fact, you know that if ad rates were online were the same as they are in print newspapers, we wouldn't be having this conversation. The problem would be solved. The revenues would be at such a level that it would more than pay for the journalism that we've been talking about. So there's lots of discussion in the report is why is this? And I'm not going to go into all of this, but one of the issues is something that economists refer to as news as a public good, or a free rider problem. And the issue there is that you can get news without actually paying for it. That's true. You can benefit from news without actually paying for it. One of the examples that we had in the report was from the News and Observer in Raleigh did a fantastic series about major flaws in the probation system, where people were getting out of jail on probation too early and killing people. And there were several hundred people who died as a result of the flaws in the probation system. So the newspaper spent several months doing this study. They uncovered it, the governor fixed it, and so now there are people walking around the streets of Raleigh who are not dead, who would have been, probably. But they don't know who they are. There's no way of knowing who they are. And what's more, they didn't have to subscribe to the newspaper to have benefited from what the newspaper did. And this is just a basic fact of the way news as public good works. It's not, something that, it's not a genie to try to put in the bottle, but it's an explanation of why it is hard to make these models work. Another aspect is that advertising is increasingly disconnected from content. So it used to be advertisers wanted to be next to content because it was a proxy for reaching a certain type of audience. You wanted to reach women age 25, you'd advertise in Mademoiselle because you knew that that demographic read that. Now you can go directly to the demographic without having to put your ad next to a piece of content. It's true for search engines. This is I think, a very remarkable chart that shows the percentage of online advertising that went to search engines in 2000 was 1%. Now it's 47%. And the same thing is true for the new technologies, Groupon, social media, things like that. It enables advertisers to go directly to consumers without putting ads next to content. It's actually good for advertisers. It's often good for consumers. It just means there's less ad revenue for media outlets. I've mostly talked about the commercial media. And I have to say one of the most interesting things to me about this is learning more about what's been going on in the nonprofit media sector. The nonprofit media sector has become a much more diverse, varied, evolving, innovative sector, and really is a very important part of this puzzle. And it includes a number of different players that we don't necessarily even think of as being part of this riddle. Public access channels. Public access channels realize, or the best of them, realize that their original mission, which is to provide a platform for people to speak out, actually is somewhat being taken up by the internet. So they're trying to evolve. And the best of them are evolving and putting more of an emphasis on digital literacy and on local accountability. Journalism schools. Journalism schools used to teach journalism the way, through a book, through pedagogy in the classroom. They are increasingly adopting what they refer to as the medical school model, which is to say, why don't we teach journalism by doing it? And this is great for the students, but it's also great for the communities. It means you have thousands and thousands of journalism school students, boots on the ground in communities, and they're not just doing abstract, exercise websites. They're building real websites that real people read. Foundations are starting to play a major role. Low-power FM stations, which already important players, and our hope is that the passage of the recent law and the forthcoming actions from the FCC will make them even more so. The nonprofit news websites we've spoken about, very exciting area. I talked about the local ones. There's also very important national nonprofits like ProPublica, which saw a gap in what they thought was insufficient investigative reporting going on at the national level as a result of these contractions. So they created something. Within the first year, they won the Pulitzer Prize. So it shows that there is not an inherent gap in quality between either commercial or non-commercial or print or web. Good journalism can be done in any form. And I really want to pause for a second on something that I was really unaware of, which is state public affairs networks. These are basically C-SPANs on the state level. I mentioned before that as spending by states has gone up, the number of State House reporters has gone down. Well, a good thing is that there are 23 states that have state C-SPANs. And they vary in depth and quality, but the really good ones are basically doing like what C-SPAN does. They show the legislative hearings, they show the floor, and they do candidate debates and issue forums and things. Frankly, we wish that that the local TV news would do more. Some of the state SPANs are doing it. But in only 4 cases are the state spends being funded by the cable operators in the way that the cable industry funds C-SPAN. And in quite a number of circumstances, they're funded by the state, which in some cases has worked out okay, but I have to say I'm not, I don't think it's the best model in the world to have the state funding the coverage of the state. Public broadcasting. Obviously, the anchor, the biggest player in the nonprofit media world is public broadcasting, public TV and public radio. We went into great depth there, looking at what they do, some of the structural issues, how they are evolving. There's tremendous innovation online in the public media space as well. To break it down a little bit further, on the public TV side, there's real strength in educational programming, cultural programming, national public affairs, everything from Frontline, NewsHour, Firing Line, to date myself a little bit. We would say, though, that we think it really is not that much local programming on public TV. Very few public TV stations actually do local news. We weren't able to get a solid number on local programming, but it seems like that's really not what they do for the most part, and there are really economic limits on that. Public radio actually is trying to do quite a bit more in the local news space. From 2004 to 2009, actually the number of public radio stations reporting that they carried local news or talk rose from 595 to 681. So they are actually trying to step into the gap that they see in the market, and especially the gap that we talked about before, where commercial news radio is not prevalent in many parts of the country. We're also seeing I think a very exciting development, which is increasing number of collaborations between the commercial media and the nonprofit media. I used to think of these as sort of parallel universes that operated separately from each other, in some cases antagonistically to each other. And now we're seeing some very interesting symbiotic relationships evolving. One, for example, KNSD, the Channel 4, the NBC station in San Diego, said, we want to do more in-depth work. We don't have the staff. Meanwhile, one of the exciting new startups, Voice of San Diego, was doing great work, so they worked out a deal. Voice of San Diego goes on the show a few times a week. They do a segment called San Diego Explained, and they do another one called San Diego Fact Check. It makes the newscast better, and it's a huge value to the Voice of San Diego that gets fantastic exposure. They can then go back to their donors and look at the impact we're having. And we're seeing this actually quite a lot. And it's, I think it's actually potentially a model that 5 years from now we may look back at and say this became a really significant element in this new ecosystem. Now, to work, it requires the nonprofits to have a critical mass of revenue. It requires them to have functional business models. So where does this all leave us? The diagnosis, to oversimplify this, is, I think, hyper-local, better than ever. Local, municipal level, state level, really struggling. National, we really haven't talked that much about, and that's because I really think that it's quite a dynamic sphere. I mean, we all have our complaints about, particular national media or things we like or don't like. But I really came away believing that it's very dynamic, it's very vibrant. We are seeing business models take hold on the national level in ways that they aren't on the local level, and so I really didn't come away worried about it in the same way as the others. International, I think, is a mixed bag. On the one hand, you have clearly some of the players that we used to rely on for international news are gone or have pulled back. I mean, the regional newspapers like Chicago Tribune, LA Times, Boston Globe used to be very important players in overseas coverage, and they basically have packed up for the most part and do much less. The networks do less. But on the other hand, we have way more people on cable news doing international coverage than we used to. NPR has increased, Bloomberg has increased, and probably more importantly, as one person put it to us, the typical citizen has more information at their fingertips about the rest of the world from the internet than a network TV producer did 10 years ago. And you can watch BBC and you can watch Al Jazeera, and there are other ways that you can get information. So I think it's a mixed bag. Okay, moving on to part 2, which will take less time. The second part was on the policy and regulatory landscape. This is where we looked at the FCC, and we looked at, to a limited extent, a few other policy areas outside the FCC. And, you know, I think it won't come as any big surprise to you, but may come as a surprise to other people outside the FCC. The FCC has a lot of policies that affect the evolution, health, and development of news media. And some of it's indirect, some of it's direct, but we wanted to take a look at a number of these. And I'm not going to go through all of them, but I wanted to mention a couple. Least Access is a program that was set up on cable to try to encourage independent programming, including local programming. It was supposed to lead to provision of up to 15% of programming on cable being least access and independent. Actually, currently less than 1% is used. The satellite set-aside. Satellite operators, when the law was passed helping to enable satellite, Congress said the FCC should set aside somewhere between 4% and 7% of satellite for educational programming, much in the same spirit as when the FCC set aside 25% of the commercial, of the broadcast airwaves for educational programming. The Congress said set aside between 4 and 7%. FCC chose 4 because the satellite industry was a fledgling industry back then and wanted to make sure that it would get off onto its feet. But at this point, programmers are being turned away because the satellite operators have hit the 4% cap and are rejecting other programmers. The Fairness Doctrine. We looked at the Fairness Doctrine and concluded, as I believe all of you have, that the Fairness Doctrine would undermine news instead of improving news and would chill speech. And so even though this was a topic that had already opinions had already been expressed on, we decided to weigh in and at least say that from the point of view of the topic that we're looking at, we think that there is no case for reinstituting the Fairness Doctrine. In fact, it would be a bad idea. We came across this fact that came to light recently, that there are shards of the Fairness Doctrine still on the books. Did not make a lot of sense to us since the policy was dead to have bits of the Fairness Doctrine on a book of living laws. So I'm glad to see that's being cleaned up. Sponsorship identification. These are the laws and rules that the FCC has. It basically says if a TV station does something like a pay-for-play arrangement, like we talked about before, they're allowed to do that. That's perfectly legal, but they do have to disclose it. And the problem is that they disclose it quickly, on the air, and you have to look really carefully and be a very attentive viewer, and they're not disclosing it online. Non-commercial broadcasters. We looked at a lot of issues of whether or not non-commercial broadcasters could have better business models in effect if they had less restrictions, and we go into some thoughts there. There were ways in which I think the CPB, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, would like to have more flexibility so that they could better incentivize collaborations and innovation and less duplication and more local programming. They agree with the idea that they would like to have more local programming, but to some extent they are a little bit hemmed in by the rules that govern them. Something else came to us, which is brought to our attention by the religious broadcasters. Religious broadcasters have asked, they would like to have the ability to spend some of the time, up to 1% of their airtime, raising money for charities. Perhaps raising money for a soup kitchen in their community or a global hunger charity. It fits very much with their mission, and they believe it also provides useful information. Currently, the FCC provides waivers in the case of extraordinary circumstances like a tsunami or a hurricane. But I frankly had a hard time understanding the justification for why the FCC would want to be in the position where it could say, okay, you have a waiver for a catastrophe that involves rain and weather, But a famine that's killing 1 million people in Africa, no, that doesn't get a waiver because it's not a natural disaster. Last but not least, broadband. Now, obviously, I think you've heard about broadband in other capacities here at the FCC. I really wanted to tie this to the topic that we're focused on. And I look at it from two different ways. One is a negative way, that if you were someone in a community that has, on the one hand, say, newspapers contracting and not doing what they used to do, but maybe there are some really good things online to counterbalance it, and you have a worse newspaper but you're not online, you're worse off. You have the worst of both worlds. That person needs to have the benefits of the online experience. From an economic point of view, it's also important because a lot of these entities that are trying to develop successful business models, the more people viewing them, the more likely they will be able to sustain a business model. So the scale that they need to succeed will be improved as you get to universal broadband. And then the final FCC thing I wanted to talk about is a very important one, which is the historic public interest obligation of broadcasters. We spent a lot of time and pages looking at this. As you know, there was in effect, and has been since the very beginning, in effect a quid pro quo, that taxpayers provide the use of the public's airwaves to broadcasters in exchange for a commitment that they serve their communities. This is a pact that broadcasters, or almost all broadcasters, I should say, fully embrace. They very much like this arrangement, and they support this principle. And I should say that even during deregulation, even when the rules were deregulated in the 1980s, the principle still remained, was not abolished, that broadcasters, as part of this deal, were supposed to provide, quote, programming that responds to issues of concern to the community. So how's this worked out? In the last 75 years, the FCC has granted, we estimate, over 100,000 license renewals. In only 4 cases was a license renewal denied because the licensee failed to meet the public interest obligation, programming obligation. In the last 30 years, not one license has been denied on these grounds. They are required to have what are called issues program lists, and this is supposed to be the mechanism for enforcing the current obligation. And stations put in this file, in a cabinet, on paper, a list of what they think the significant issues are. But the FCC has been fairly vague about what do we mean by a significant issue? What do we mean by programming? So stations have gotten a bit creative in some cases on how they define this. So for instance, one station we saw, their issues program list, what they listed under the area of how they were serving important community needs was America's Next Top Model Casting Call, an open casting call for Cycle 14 of America's Top Model on July 11th at 7 Sushi Ultra Lounge, sponsored by Sonny's Hair and Wigs. And it went on like that. Now, some stations have very detailed memos describing the very significant public affairs programming that they do. I've obviously picked out one of the more amusing ones. There's actually a broad range. But it's a broad range because stations really don't know what is expected of them. And part of this, I don't want to sound like I'm basically saying, oh, this is the FCC's staff that was screwing around this whole time, and if we'd just been on the ball, we could have done this. I think I think you might make an argument at some points there might have been some muddy policy here or there. But there's also, the biggest issue is that there's a real dilemma. There's a real dilemma, which is on the one hand, you have this real concern, you have this need. On the other hand, you have the First Amendment. And when you get into a situation of getting prescriptive enough that you can have a very easy to enforce rule, you start to have a situation where someone at the FCC is going to have to decide what is important and legitimate programming at a station. If you back off and say, okay, we're not going to get that detailed, but we want to have, certainly we should have broad principles, well, then you get vague and you get Sonny's Hair and Wigs as a key feature of the program issue. In short, I think the system is broken. the public interest obligation system currently at the FCC is broken. We also talk about non-FCC areas. I'm only going to talk about two of them, even though we go into quite a number of other ones in the report. But two in particular I wanted to mention. Tax issues. One of the things that came back to us a number of times from websites was, we're trying to create, nonprofit websites especially, we're trying to create these websites, but we're very confused about whether we're going to get dinged by the IRS. One guy said he shut down his website because he wasn't sure. Well, I wanted to take advertising. One lawyer told him he could take it. Another one told him he shouldn't take it. He was afraid that if he did it, the IRS was going to shut down. He's a two-person operation. He didn't have the money to have a whole operation dealing with IRS reporting, so he stopped. This is not an example of current law fostering innovation. The recommendations, part 3. First, just to review what we've just said, the very, very key points. Obviously, we said the media landscape is very vibrant, but there are a couple of areas of concern. Some of the rules intended to advance the public interest are ineffective. I would add another one, which is that technology has evolved in a way that increases the potential potency of transparency as a policy tool, and I'm going to talk about that in a bit. An overarching point, which is that I actually do not think that the government is the main player in this drama. It's just, I think what we do is very important. I think there are obstacles that the government should remove. I think there are ways that policy can encourage innovation. There are resources that aren't being well spent, that ought to be well spent. But having said that, I still don't think that the government is the main determinant of what's going to happen. But still, let's get it right, and let's make it easier for I think in some cases, really inspiring people who are trying to solve this problem. Point number 1 is that emphasize online disclosure as a pillar of FCC media policy. This has a number of different implications. Over time, frankly, the paper file should be a thing of the past. It's called the public inspection file. It's time we made it possible for the public to inspect it in an easier way. And putting it on the internet is a way that can actually take this policy that was the right idea in the first place and give it life and effectiveness it has really not had. At the same time, I think it is also time to eliminate some rules that are either burdensome, potentially burdensome, or discouraging of some of the behavior we're after. So we are recommending that the FCC consider terminating the localism proceeding, repealing the remnants of the fairness doctrine. Maybe you've already taken care of that one. I should cross that one off. And replacing the enhanced disclosure rule. The enhanced disclosure rule was something that the Commission passed a few years ago with a very good principle behind it, which is that instead of having detailed program rules, let's have serious disclosure. But it was overly burdensome in and of itself. It required too much, and it also wasn't done in a way that was really took advantages of the internet, because it was done a few years ago and things have really changed a lot. We're actually at a point now where we can make this much more effective. So we're suggesting replacing the enhanced disclosure rule with something else, which is a streamlined web-based form online, which broadcasters would fill out, to have a shorter list, but an important list of really important information. Most important is the amount of programming you're doing about your community. I think it also should include things like news sharing arrangements, partnership arrangements, how the multicast channels are being used, website accessibility for people with disabilities, whether the website is accessible. And I think this is really a great opportunity to do something about the pay-for-play arrangements that I talked about before. These pay-for-play arrangements, as I said, are not illegal. They're already allowed to be. They're already required to be disclosed. So what we are suggesting is that anytime a sponsorship ID rule is required to be disclosed on the air, it should also be disclosed on the internet, which will create a permanent record, searchable by anyone in the community, citizens, watchdogs, competitors, who will be able to see which stations in a community or in the country are doing this. We also believe that the FCC should agree to the proposal that religious broadcasters and other non-commercial broadcasters that do not receive funding from CPB be allowed to use up to 1% of their time for raising money for charities. And they should disclose it too. They should disclose what they're using it for so people can see that it's being used well, but this seems like a sensible thing. In the same spirit of disclosure, satellite operators have disclosure requirements. Those should be online. And I think it is also time to look at both the set-aside program and the least access program in greater depth to see whether they're really fulfilling the needs that they were set out by Congress. The next category is make it easier for citizens to monitor their government by putting more proceedings, documents, and data online. We've talked about the importance of disclosure and transparency at the FCC. Well, this goes way beyond the FCC. There's a real exciting movement out there for governments in general to put data online. This is fantastic and tremendously important. It makes it easier for citizens to get useful information, makes it possible for citizens to hold institutions accountable, and it lowers the cost of journalism. When you have more data online, things that would have taken a long time can be done quickly by reporters. So it makes sense in many, many different ways. It should be done in certain formats to make it easy for analyzing. It actually has the potential of creating jobs, because when you put this information out, entrepreneurs then look at it and say, oh, I could create an app here that will package this data with this data and then sell it to people, and that'll create an even better thing. So this is happening now, and it will continue to happen the more we put this information out. I should say, a more old media idea is to go back to the statesmans. Every state should have a statesman. Every state should have a state-based C-SPAN so that people can watch the legislative sessions of the state legislature, watch the hearings, watch debates, and be more informed about their communities. There are a lot of different ways of doing this. In some states, the public TV station is running the statespan. In some cases, it's the cable operators. In one state, only one state, the satellite operators are offering it. In general, I would hope that the commercial operators would approach this in the way that they approach C-SPAN. They view that as one of their signal civic achievements. I think it would be an equally signal achievement if they did the same thing on the state level. We recommend that Congress actually look at whether there are some incentives that could be given to the operators. For instance, we threw out as an idea, there are many others I'm sure, perhaps they should get a regulatory relief on their least access requirement if they have a state C-SPAN or if they support a state C-SPAN, or if they support a local cable news channel. The third set of recommendations is, I think, a really interesting one, is to consider directing existing government advertising spending toward local media. The federal government, last time this was counted, in 2005, spent $1 billion on advertising. This is for things like military recruiting, public health announcements, safety, things like that. It tends to go to national media, entertainment media for the most part, and all geared toward important functions. So we thought, is it possible that it can be done in a cost-effective way that would achieve the goals of these marketing campaigns, but have it targeted to local news media because of the serious problems we have in American communities with local news media? And it turns out there was a fascinating proposal sent to us by the local broadcasters that basically said, 10 years ago, it's sort of understandable that someone that wanted to do a national ad buy would buy national. It was more efficient and effective. But now there are ways, both for technology and because businesses have developed, that you can do a national ad buy through local TV. Turns out the newspaper industry has done the same thing. You want to buy an ad in 100 newspapers across the country, you don't have to call up 100 newspapers. There, you can go to one place and do the ads throughout the country. Same thing on the internet. So we are recommending that the government look at the possibility of targeting this ad money toward local media. It has to be done in a way that doesn't undermine the effectiveness of the campaign. This can't become primarily, a media helper program. It still has to be a program geared toward achieving the goals of the agencies. But if it can be done in a way that helps local media, that would be fantastic. It also has to be done in a way that has a rock-solid, impregnable political wall. Because you do not want to go back to the 1800s when Andrew Jackson was doling out advertising contracts to his favorite newspapers. I think this can be done because there are ad networks that are very blind, and I think it's very solvable, and it's something we should turn to. Nonprofit media. I'm not going to go through all these recommendations, but we have quite a few in the report that basically says the nonprofit sector is really quite important. And we should really make sure that we're not thwarting the innovation that's going on in the nonprofit sector. I think that folks that are more expert in tax matters than we are should take a good hard look at this and look at how tax rules could be clarified to make it more likely that nonprofit can get traction. I believe foundations should put more money into this area. Philanthropists, individual donors should put more money into this. And we should not look at it as something you do instead of the cause you care about. It's something that is going to make the cause you care about more effective. CPB, we recommend that they be given more flexibility so they can target more locally and be more innovative and fund more innovation. The community media centers should continue with the innovation that they're doing. And we really would hope that PEG centers that really are doing this, that are really trying to adapt to the new world and come up with really fascinating, powerful ways of serving their communities, should not be cut off by state governments or city governments. They're too important. Low power FM, same thing. Broadband access. I guess I don't really need to go into great detail about the importance of universal broadband, but I wanted to underline it again because it's kind of something that really is almost a prerequisite for everything else we've talked about. Finally, as we go through this transition, we really need to make sure that the historically underserved communities that are sometimes left out of media evolution are not. And there's a number of different approaches to this we suggest in the report. One of them, for instance, is that Congress should consider reinstating the tax certificate program that was pretty effective while it was there for encouraging ownership of small businesses, including minorities and women. So to summarize, it's a really important moment of opportunity. On the one hand, you have this very, very vibrant media landscape. At the same time, you have serious gaps. And we believe that if we take the right steps and avoid taking the wrong steps in a way that can preserve all of these strengths, preserve the innovation, while at the same time addressing these problems that we've talked about, we really will end up with the best media system that we've ever had. Thank you very much.
Steve, thank you very, very much for all the work that went into that, for the thorough report. I'll have a couple of comments, but first let me ask my colleagues. Commissioner Cobbs?
Well, a lot to talk about, but I promise I will be relatively brief. Thank you, first of all, Steve, for your energetic presentation of the report and for all the hard work that you put into it, and I'll have more to say about that later. Obviously, we have some very serious problems here, and the issue is, what are we going to do about them? Let's begin with a basic truth. The future of our country's media is an issue that goes to the heart of our democracy. A well-informed electorate is the premise and prerequisite of functioning self-government. To make this compact work, it is imperative that the FCC play a vital role in helping to ensure that all Americans have access to diverse and competing news and information that provide the grist for democracy's churning mill. But for most of the past 30 years, the Commission has turned a blind and sometimes hostile eye toward this responsibility. Abdication is no longer an option. It will come as a surprise to few here this morning that this just-released staff report and its accompanying recommendations are not entirely the bold response for which I hoped and dared to dream. Instead, the overarching conclusion of the staff report seems to be that America's media landscape is mostly vibrant and there is no overall crisis of news or information. But it is a crisis when, as the report tells us, more than 1/3 of our commercial broadcasters offer no news whatsoever to their communities of license. America's news and information resources keep shrinking, and hundreds of stories that could inform our citizens go untold and indeed undiscovered. Where is the vibrancy when hundreds of newsrooms have been decimated and tens of thousands of reporters are walking the street in search of a job rather than walking their beats in search of a story? And I think it goes beyond local news. I cannot say I share the conclusion that national and international news is in good shape. The shrinking resources put into investigative reporting that you talk about, the diminishment of investment in bureaus nationally in Washington and overseas, I think, tell a different story, which leads too often to the substitution of glossy infotainment for the hard news that people really need. Where is the urgency? The real urgency for this commission to wade in and really grapple with the shortfalls that you document in this report. Enlightened policy that promotes the public interest is basically glossed over by the staff report as having been tried and failed. Let's look, for example, at the claim that policies like broadcast relicensing have failed and therefore need to be replaced with something new or perhaps by nothing. I agree that our current licensing process has failed. That is primarily because beginning 30 years ago, the Commission wiped from its books most of the public interest guidelines that consumers and advocates had won after long, tough struggles for media reform. Our licensing approach became one of just send us a postcard once every 8 years and your renewal is a slam dunk certainty. No questions asked. As you point out, the FCC has not taken a license away for public interest non-performance for the 10 years I have been here or in the 20 years before that, nor does the Commission even issue warnings or impose a probationary period, giving a poor-performing licensee a chance to clean up its act. The point here is not to take licenses away, but to use the public interest processes available to us to encourage greater emphasis on local news and information. It can be done. When the majority of meaningful rules were dismantled in the early 1980s, we were told there would be little impact on viewers. Excuse me, that turned out demonstrably not to be the case. So before we loosen any more rules, we should pause to recognize the outcome of treating TV no differently than toaster, as one chairman of the FCC put it back in the early 1980s. The irony here is that when the actions of government weaken the fourth estate, there is less of a check on government itself. The report and your presentation quotes David Simon on this, saying the next 10 or 15 years in this country are going to be a halcyon era for state and local political corruption. That is frightening. Vigilant and vibrant journalism can mightily discourage that from happening, but only if we take action now, and yes, the FCC has a role to play. One of the three pillars underlying the public interest is localism. Localism is about making sure that citizens in local communities are supplied with in-depth programming about public and civic affairs, that they have available programming to reflect the needs, interests, and cultures of the diverse people living there, and that those views have some opportunity for expression on the airwaves. Localism means less program homogenization, more local and less canned music, and community news actually originated in the market where it is broadcast, rather than being imported so much of the time from faraway studios controlled by absentee owners. In this continuing era of media industry consolidation, we all know that coverage of local music, local talent, local culture, local sports, local diversity communities, local political issues, and election campaigns, other than horse race odds making, are more the exception than the rule. The staff report does recognize problems in the generation of local news and information and the lack of accountability. much to its credit. This underscores points I have been making for years. But instead of calling for stepped-up direct commission action, it too often tinkers around the edges. For example, urging philanthropies to find better ways to do their business, asking Congress to change the tax code, and suggesting the government direct more of its advertising to local media. Then, rather stunningly, I thought, the staff report recommends shutting down our pending localism proceeding. I have participated in dozens of hearings and hundreds of meetings on this docket. I have traveled to hearings and town hall meetings across the country to learn directly from tens of thousands of citizens what they think about their local and national media. I've listened to folks far into the night in sessions that sometimes lasted as long as 9 hours. We have had notices of inquiry and notices of proposed rulemakings on this proceeding. We've done the analysis. We've made proposals, and now it is time to act. I remarked after the localism NPRM came out that some of its proposals could and should be modified. No question about it, before they became final rules. This could be quickly and easily accomplished, and it makes more sense to me than walking away from a huge and still relevant record. The staff report also delves briefly into media ownership and correctly alludes to some of the harmful effects of consolidation. Less local news, fewer reporters, and less diversity. But in the recommendations, there is some hedging about whether all that consolidation we are living with today, all those local independent stations brought up by mega media interests, has been good or bad. The report even suggests that some additional newspaper broadcast mergers could well be beneficial in some circumstances. The policy prescriptions here, as elsewhere in the staff report, don't track the diagnosis. Keeping in mind the paucity of resources dedicated to accountability journalism today, I hope the Commission, in its upcoming quadrennial review, will weigh much more seriously than it has in the past the heavy costs that media consolidation has afflicted on America's news and information infrastructure. Diversity is another pillar of the public interest. I'll put this simply, in spite of occasional instances of progress in recent years, media's overall grade in covering, reflecting, explaining, and mirroring America's amazing cultural diversity is dreadful. Diversity of viewpoint, diversity in ownership, diversity in who and what we see on TV, and in diversity in who runs the companies, all these are worse in media than in most other American industries. The staff report seems aware of a serious problem here. You alluded to it. But what's lacking are recommendations for strong, implementable now programs that begin to make a difference for generations of media injustice. As a starting point, I repeat my suggestion of some months ago that we tee up at least one of the recommendations of the Diversity Advisory Committee at every agenda meeting for the next year. The staff report's primary policy prescription is disclosure. Put more and better information online where consumers and advocates can readily access it, and good things will happen. I'm all for disclosure. And I was happy more than 2 years ago when my colleagues and I voted for an enhanced disclosure item which would provide significantly more meaningful program information than what is currently available. Since then, the item seems to be stuck somewhere in the kind of limbo Dante could relate to, stranded somewhere between the FCC and the Office of Management and Budget. Why don't we resolve to get it unstuck, do whatever fine-tuning is needed, and vote at next month's agenda meeting on a revised order, or at least a further notice of proposed rulemaking to finish this long pending job. But let's also remember that disclosure is a means to an end, not an end in itself. If disclosure brings to public light actions that require redress, where is the redress to be found? Some will doubt whether it is to be found in a commission that has for most of 30 years sworn off public interest rules and guidelines. Why would consumers bother to plumb the internet looking at public files if there is so little confidence that their effort will be rewarded with remedial action? Over the years, some hardy souls have gone through the paper files, amassed their evidence, and petitioned the commission to deny relicensing. all to no effect. What is the incentive to move that hapless process online? Also on the disclosure front, I continue to believe that the sooner we can ensure fuller disclosure of political advertising sponsorship, the better off our democracy will be. Voters have a right to know who is really behind all those glossy and sometimes wildly misleading ads we see on TV. Concealing from voters that an ad brought to us by Citizens for a More Beautiful America is really sponsored by a cabal of cable companies polluting the water we drink is not just non-disclosure, it is deception aimed at buying elections. We need to fix this, and the FCC has an active role to play. I suggest the Commission tee up an item in the next 2 months and moves us toward meaningful disclosure of political advertising. The digital age, as you point out, holds amazing promise for expanding the scope of our democratic discourse. The staff report recognizes this, and the present Commission has focused tremendous energy on both broadband deployment and adoption. But let's recognize up front that building a new town square paved with broadband bricks and stacked with good news and information is not going to happen on autopilot. Right now, the vast majority of the news we read on the internet is produced elsewhere in traditional media newsrooms. Interesting, new, and information innovations have, we all know, developed on the net. Although I think it would take some exception to the extent of its presence on the network, because news sites are in the low single digit as addresses where people really go. But the more important point is, what hasn't developed on the internet is the model or the mass or the momentum to sustain the kind of resource-hungry journalism that an informed electorate requires. An open internet is not the entire solution for robust 21st century journalism. It's a tougher problem than that. And I, for one, don't believe we'll get there absent some positive public policy solutions. We have never had successful dissemination of news and information in this country without some encouraging public policy guidance. Going back to the earliest days of the young republic, when Washington and Madison and Jefferson saw to it that newspapers were financially able to reach readers all across the fledgling young republic. They didn't see it as violative of the First Amendment that they wrote. And the Supreme Court more recently has not seen it as violative of the First Amendment, whose purpose, we are told, is a preservation of a vibrant marketplace of ideas to sustain our democracy. The same purpose of expanding the information infrastructures what gave rise to broadcast licensing later on, much closer to our own era. So I don't see any reason why we should forsake America's workable past and deny our own history at this point. There's more to be said about the staff report, and I will be talking about it in the days ahead. But rather than parsing the contents of a particular report, I intend to spend most of my time encouraging the Commission to take up its charge of responsible public interest oversight and to do everything it can to encourage the news and information and diversity that Americans have a right to expect from their media. If the staff report helps generate a spirited national dialogue toward that end, it will have served a purpose. If we can learn from the history traced in the staff report, much of it very good, we will be able to craft stronger public policy proposals. And if the Commission can move swiftly ahead on some of the good ideas that are offered, and there are indeed good ideas offered, we can reap real benefits from it. I know very well that compiling this staff report was not an easy task. In fact, the undertaking was enormous, and I am cognizant and appreciative of the work that Steve and his team put into the report. And I hope that Steve and his colleagues, for whom I have tremendous respect, will take the comments I have made today in the spirit in which they are intended, so that we can move beyond the this report after we read and digest it, to an action plan making the FCC central to solving the challenges we're talking about. Launching or rededicating ourselves to such proceeding as enhanced disclosure and diversity and localism and political advertising and media ownership and reinvigorated public interest licensing will put us on the road we need to travel. I also want us as a commission to talk directly to the American people about all this in full commission hearings in various parts of the country. And I suggest, Mr. Chairman, a minimum of 3 in the 3 months ahead to see how well citizens across the land think they are being served by our present news and information infrastructure, and to elicit their ideas for the future. I've been fortunate enough to have the opportunity to do this kind of listening for 10 years now, and I never come back from such conversations without knowing more than when I went out. Let's hold these hearings, talk with citizens, expeditiously enhance the record, and take actions by the end of the year. There's real urgency here. I'm cognizant of the fact that the FCC can't solve all of the problems that this report describes, but it can address and help resolve many of them. These issues mean a lot to me. I believe they mean a lot to our country. I have been outspoken about them, and sometimes blunt, I know, and I intend to keep speaking out about them in the months, and if needed, the years ahead. This nation faces stark and threatening challenges to the leadership that brought us and the world successfully through so many dire threats in the century just past. Now we confront fundamental new uncertainties about the revival of our economy, where new jobs will come from, how we will prosper in a hyper-competitive global arena, how to support the kind of education that our kids and grandkids will need to thrive, indeed to survive in this difficult time, how to open the doors of opportunity to every American, no matter who they are, where they live, or the particular circumstances of their individual lives. We've got a lot to get on top of as a country. And if we don't have the facts, and we don't have the information, and we don't have the news about what's going on in the neighborhood, and the town, and the nation, and the world around us, our future is going to be very vastly diminished. That's why so much rides on the future of what we are talking about today. And I'll say it again, how these issues get decided will deeply affect our country's democracy and our country's future. I cannot and I will not leave these issues where they are. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Cobbs. Commissioner McDowell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And first of all, Steve, thank you. You and your entire team, that looked like the cast credits for a Cecil B. DeMille film there that you showed at the very beginning. But for all of your efforts to amass a really significant amount of information and analysis about the current state of the media and information marketplace. I look forward to reading your voluminous report in greater detail. I've been chewing on it since I got the draft a few days ago. And I also look forward to thinking further about how the developments and trends you identify might inform the FCC's own small role in affecting just one corner of the broader media landscape. At the outset, however, I do want to applaud you for your guidance of the process that led to the report and for your own very thoughtful, nuanced, and responsive leadership style. I've enjoyed our meetings and discussions on this.
Thank you.
And next, for the sake of those of you who may not be familiar with how the Commission works, and I've only been here 5 years and I'm still figuring that out myself sometimes, I want to stress that this report is simply that, a report, which, though generated by a hardworking group of agency staffers, has no binding effect. In other words, this report does not establish new FCC rules. It does not repeal any old rules. It does not even formally propose adopting new rules or discarding old rules. Rather, The report contains a set of recommendations, only some of which are directed to the Commission, that may in time help shape proposals for new rules to come or old rules to go. If and when that happens, of course, the agency will launch proceedings that begin, as the law requires, with notice and comment opportunities that afford interested parties an opportunity to weigh in with their own perspectives, facts, and analyses before the FCC adopts any new or amended regulations. So now that I'm done with that legal disclaimer, no applause from Austin Schlick, but anyway, I thought that we'll get some later. As with any 300-plus page document, this one contains some statements and assessments with which I agree and some with which I disagree. The responses I'll share at this point are all preliminary because I have several hours of reading left to do. I would expect that no reasonable person takes issue with the report's characterization of the media and information marketplace as vibrant, competitive, innovative, and rapidly evolving. The facts supporting those conclusions have been right in front of us for years, and they should no longer be ignored when it comes to making reality-based public policy. I also share the report's general optimism about the future and welcome its recognition of the government's limited ability as both a practical and legal matter to affect either the operation or output of tomorrow's successful media and information platforms. More importantly, the government should keep its heavy hands off of journalism. Journalistic freedom, as Steve pointed out, is a primary protection of the Bill of Rights. And full disclosure, both of my parents were journalists. With respect to the report's specific recommendations, it will come as no surprise to FCC watchers that I agree with several of the suggestions, given my own past statements on many of these media issues. For example, I am very pleased that the report urges the elimination of the enhanced disclosure form, calling it overly complex, which is putting it mildly. I cast the only dissenting vote against the creation of this form back in 2007, and anything we can do to hasten its demise would serve the public interest. I also agree with the report's call for closing the localism proceeding without further action. Pending proposals in that docket for government-mandated community advisory boards, 24-hour manning of broadcast stations, and detailed accounting of local music content are indeed overly bureaucratic, unworkable, and unnecessarily burdensome, to quote the report. They are also impractical, unneeded, and classic examples of regulatory overreach. Those are my words. And of course, I endorse the report's call for eliminating the remnants of the so-called fairness doctrine that still litter our rule books. My long-standing opposition to anything resembling that unconstitutional policy is no secret. Accordingly, I call upon the Commission to complete the elimination of the doctrine by the end of the year. Merely offering it up as a recommendation today has no legal effect. In that spirit, the Commission, by that time, also should finish all of the regulatory elimination proceedings discussed not only in Chairman Genachowski's June 6th letter to Chairman Upton of the House Commerce Committee, but in my May 19th speech as well. I would also like for the FCC to consider the elimination of the outdated newspaper broadcast cross-ownership ban in our upcoming quadrennial review of our media ownership rules. My hypothesis is that the cross-ownership ban caused the unintended effect of reducing the number of voices, especially newspapers, in scores of American communities. Given that, however, the demise of American newspapers has been written about for quite a long time. Their epitaph and tombstones have been written for quite some time. This reminds me of a book that I keep in my office, and I'll just read you a couple of quotes from it. And the first quote is, "The printing press is on the way to obsolescence, yet journalism marches on." It goes on to say that as journalism migrates into new areas of communication, its practitioners too are on the move. The commerce and information flourishes and quickens its tempo. New skills are developed, and the major problem for newspaper journalists is to keep their readers from migrating too. Now, this could have been written today. I found this actually in my mother's library. She passed away in 2005, just a few months before I was appointed. And it's entitled The Fading American Newspaper. Very clever printing there with it fading. And you have to ask yourself, when was this published? Was it published in 2004, Was it published maybe in 1976, the year after the newspaper cross-ownership ban was put into effect? It was actually published 51 years ago, back in 1960. And my point is, these issues have been around for a long time. This debate continues, but journalism does march on and continue to live. I have some reservations, however, about other recommendations in the report. For instance, while I appreciate that in calling for a new online quarterly disclosure report for broadcasters, the staff drafters are attempting to craft a more streamlined and useful obligation, I continue to wonder about the need for such a mandate in the first place. After all, it's not exactly as if broadcasters are in the business of trying to hide their on-air content from the public. If the government wants to know what is being broadcast, it can turn on the TV or the radio, although the Big Brother implications of that also concern me. I'm also not convinced that there is any pressing policy justification for potentially increasing the satellite TV set-aside for non-commercial content from the current level of 4% of satellite operators' capacity to some higher percentage. Many of the report's recommendations, as Steve has highlighted, are not directed at the FCC at all, but are instead intended to spark debate and action elsewhere, including among private sector entrepreneurs, nonprofits, and foundations, as well as other sectors of government, from the federal level to local lawmakers. Passionate debate ignites easily in this arena, and I sense that Steve's first objective in this regard has already been achieved. I will watch with interest to see which embers catch fire beyond our own regulatory realm. And just to reiterate, please keep in mind that the FCC actually has not done anything today. What we have before us is a report with a few recommendations. It's up to the four of us to turn the more constructive recommendations into deregulatory action that better fits a competitive and dynamic marketplace. So let's get going with that. And thanks again to Steve and everyone on the report team, especially including my friend Professor James Hamilton of my alma mater, Duke University. Little shout out there, Jay, for giving us all much to think about. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Commissioner Clyburn.
Thank you. Steve Waldman and his team are to be commended for the amount of time and energy that went into publishing this report, and the chairman is to be thanked for commissioning these findings. The issues covered here fall into many categories, some new, some timely, some sad, and yes, some scary. But the findings and recommendations contained in these 465 pages, that includes footnotes, will hopefully begin conversations on new and innovative ideas for both improving and saving our existing media landscapes and platforms. I am hopeful that we all take advantage of an incredible opportunity to get a constructive dialogue going. When I served for 14 years as a publisher and general manager of a small weekly newspaper based in Charleston, South Carolina, I went out of my way to highlight significant people, issues, and positive topics of interest that, quite frankly, were being ignored by the larger and better financed media outlets. Times have changed, and there are very few people like the old Mignon around anymore. Media is, without argument, all around us. But for all of its omnipresence, are the people I used to touch each week being better served? Quality local stories and reporting are precious avenues of knowledge for residents in small towns and in big cities, and today, despite all of these outlets, they are at risk. This report explores the media landscape in detail, and I am hoping it will shine a strong and urgent light on the state of local media. It touches on causes of and potential remedies of issues of grave concern, and all of us, not just the FCC, need to consider them very seriously. We must not stand idly by and watch the evaporation of our precious news outlets. We face not a broad crisis of the news or content, but something more specific, a shortage of local professional accountability reporting, the language in the report states. This is likely to lead to more government waste, more local corruption, worse schools, a less informed electorate, and even lives lost. The loss of 13,400 newsroom positions in just 4 years is attention-grabbing and should move us to ask, what does this mean when it comes to the in-depth coverage of issues and local concerns when it comes to industry, government, and our communities at large. Efforts such as creating state-based C-SPANs, targeting federal advertising spending to local news media, and helping nonprofit news operations to succeed are all possible positive steps toward improving local accountability of reporting. Apart from local concerns, I am intrigued by many of the other findings in the report, from the coverage of regulatory agencies to services available to individuals with disabilities. One of the more intriguing aspects is the section regarding modern media policy in historically underserved communities. It is essential to introduce as many people as possible to the vast opportunities that modern technology provides, and the requirement for TV stations to disclose whether their websites are accessible to the visually and hearing impaired is something we should take very seriously. Also, information about minority and female ownership helps us further debate the issues surrounding existing disparities, and I intend to take a deeper dive on this in the months to come. Additionally, attaining more accurate information about racial, ethnic, and gender employment at broadcast stations is a must, and I look forward to a more robust dialogue on that as well. I am also pleased by the suggested focus on communications programs at historically black colleges and universities. The idea of a Minority Capital Institute to help would-be entrepreneurs locate opportunities for financing is one idea that I look forward to discussing further. Numerous recommendations toward making more data available online for public consumption are in line with the FCC's goal of greater efficiency and transparency. One of these proposals is to have television broadcasters file a streamlined online form containing essential data as opposed to the current requirement of reporting on 365 days of programming. This could and would reduce the burden on broadcasters to file paper reports while providing more transparency on more important information for the public. I look forward to working with broadcasters on this issue as well. The more transparency there is in government, the more confident people can feel about what their government is doing for them. It is my hope that this report will also pave the way to more discussions about what we can do to help making online filing easier and simpler while still giving the public easy access to this important information. I am eager to listen and be part of the discussions that flow from the release of this report. It highlights very clearly that all of us have the capacity and the opportunity in our personal and official capacities to be influencers and change agents when it comes to the state of our media. I hope that the Commission will continue to find ways to work with the private industry and local entities on many of the recommendations and concerns that the report highlights. I am confident that we can make meaningful strides toward improving our media landscape on a local level and filling the gaps between what worked so well in the past and what people are looking for in the present. I want to again thank you, Steve, and your team for your diligent work. There is a quote that I am not sure who said, we are not sure who said, but it struck me today as I was listening to the comments. Journalism is the first rough draft of history. If we believe and embrace that quote, then the publishing of this report has the capacity to serve as an incredible conduit for enhanced community and civic engagement. And the presenting of multiple examples in which we can and will read more about, options and opportunities, all of these things highlight the diversity and dexterity of every single market and their ability to evolve in ways that best serve their communities, their people, and all Americans. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner Clyburn, and Steve and team, thank you again for the achievement that this report reflects. I want to thank each of my colleagues for their thoughtful comments. In particular, I want to recognize Commissioner Copps for his longstanding commitment and passion in this area. Many of the issues and recommendations highlighted in this report are directly related to topics on which Commissioner Copps has long been educating the public and his fellow commissioners. This is an area on which there's been debate for many years in the past and on which there'll be debate for many years in the future. And that is as it should be in an area involving both enduring principles and changing technologies. It is as it should be in an area that has the First Amendment and a vibrant free market of ideas as its central star. And so it's a healthy thing, I think, that there are differences of opinion among us. Different levels of confidence, for example, in the ability of government to solve problems in this area where the First Amendment rightly limits government's role. On this, I believe caution is warranted. Different views on how to approach broadcasters' public interest obligations, on whether the shift in emphasis outlined in this report is more likely to be effective and consistent with the Constitution and more attuned to the practical needs and opportunities of today's landscape and tomorrow's. I think it is. And different levels of optimism on what news and information entrepreneurs, both new entrants and traditional players using new media platforms, can achieve with a free, open, and universally available internet, and whether business models will emerge and strengthen. On this, I'm optimistic, cautiously, but optimistic. These points and the fundamental fact that the only thing certain about the future in this area is ongoing change are reasons to focus on the steps the report focuses on, including achieving universal broadband for all Americans, ensuring low entry barriers for news and information entrepreneurs, moving public information online in a way that's easily available to consumers, citizens, and reporters, and enabling the development of business models that can sustain a vibrant and strong news and information industry in the 21st century. These and the other approaches outlined today are preferable, in my opinion, to ones that would involve a heavier government hand, particularly in the area of speech and content. They more strongly reflect both the spirit and the law of the First Amendment, and I believe they're more likely to achieve their objectives than past approaches, which, while certainly well-meaning, have proven ineffective, as the Waldman report shows, and as a number of leading and respected commentators who have been involved in these issues for decades have concluded. Now, despite the differences that exist, I believe we all share the same goals: a vibrant, free press and an informed and enlightened citizenry playing central roles in our democracy and our economy. The report issued today builds on these core principles. It's important for many reasons, the report is, but I'd like to highlight three areas. First, the report makes clear that new technology is creating a new world of opportunity to keep the public informed in ways we couldn't even imagine just a few years ago. Digital innovations have made the gathering and distribution of news and information faster, less expensive, and more democratic. With the internet, everyone who's connected has access to their own personal printing press or even TV station. New communications technologies are connecting more people in more ways and in more places inside the U.S. and out. Twitter, Facebook, mobile phones, and other new technologies are connecting and empowering citizens and journalists around the world, helping open closed societies and paving the way to democracy and freedom. In the U.S., we see more and more news and information entrepreneurs pursuing their visions online and on mobile with creativity and confidence. Empowering individuals with new digital tools has given us breakthroughs like hyperlocal news, as Steve discussed. In many cities today, you can find news on your individual, neighborhood, or street. Even in the heyday of newspapers, this type of block-by-block information and coverage wasn't available. In our nation's history, we've never had a greater opportunity to realize the founders' vision of a free society bolstered by a strong and free press and an informed citizenry. So the first contribution of the report is its focus on the opportunities of new technologies. And the second is its focus on the challenges. Foremost is the disruptive impact the internet and economic pressures have had on local news gathering. As we've heard, newspapers have cut back staff, and something we would have thought impossible 10 years ago, shut down in material numbers. Local broadcast news continues to play an important role, with some stations increasing their commitment to their communities and seizing multi-platform opportunities. But many other TV stations have cut back or offered no news or limited local content. With the multitude of facts and data, the report identifies an emerging gap in local news coverage that has not yet been fully filled by other media. This matters because if citizens don't get local news and information, the health of our democracy suffers. Professional journalists do provide a vital check against corruption in both government and business. The less quality local reporting we have, the less likely we are to learn about government misdeeds, schools that fail children, hospitals that mistreat patients, factories that pollute local water. Local reporting is essential to accountability. That's why Thomas Jefferson said he'd rather have newspapers without government than a government without newspapers. The technology has changed, but the point endures. The third important contribution of this report is that it suggests thoughtful and practical initiatives to help address the challenges it identifies. In crafting recommendations, the report started with the overriding and correct recognition that the First Amendment circumscribes the role government can play in improving local news. It also recognizes that the only thing certain about the future in this area is ongoing change in technologies and markets. But Steve Waldman and the team did not throw up their hands and say there's nothing to be done, nor would that have been the right answer. While government is not the main player in this drama, there are areas where government can make a positive difference. And Steve developed a creative set of recommendations for government, for the private sector, and the nonprofit sector that can collectively have a big positive impact and make it possible for citizens and entrepreneurs that are trying to solve these problems to do so. The report's recommendations, as we've heard, focus on several areas: on achieving universal broadband access for all Americans, on ongoing vigilance to ensure low entry barriers for news and information entrepreneurs and new entrants, including preserving the internet's freedom and openness, on streamlining and removing obstacles for traditional news providers seeking to distribute their news and information on multiple platforms, or to strike new and innovative partnerships, on enabling the development of business models that can sustain news and information in the 21st century, on ensuring that media policy works for historically underserved communities, on government transparency and encouraging the development of ideas like state C-SPANs, on moving public information from paper to online in a way that's easily available to consumers, citizens, and reporters. On that latter point, there is much room for progress by agencies at all levels of government, federal, state, and local, and much benefit that can be had with accelerated progress. And while the FCC has been steadily moving information from paper to online, we had an example of that in our first item this morning, this report identifies additional areas for progress. For example, there's data and information that the FCC asks broadcasters and others to disclose, but this information is still being disclosed in paper form, generally in filing cabinets at the stations themselves. In a broadband internet world, that just doesn't make any sense. The report recommends accelerating the move from paper disclosures to online with the eventual goal of making all public information available online. That won't happen overnight. Some things are harder to do and more costly. And costs and burdens on small businesses and others, of course, will be taken into account, but the goal should be clear and is correct. In the internet age, we have to be moving in this direction. Beyond the general call to move from paper disclosures to digital, the report makes an important recommendation about what exactly we ask broadcasters to disclose. It suggests that we change course, and rather than creating programming quotas for broadcasters and rather than implementing some pending rules that are overly burdensome, we create a streamlined, web-based system that will more effectively and efficiently provide citizens and communities more information. For example, if some stations are allowing advertisers to dictate news coverage through pay-for-play arrangements, the public should be able to find out about that and be able to find out about it online. Conversely, if one station is doing far more coverage about their community than others, the public should know that too. The report calls this a shift in emphasis. I support this shift because I think it not only is more respectful of the First Amendment, because it'll be more effective than what the agency has been trying for the past decades. The technology of the internet makes it possible for disclosure-based public policy approaches to be far more effective than ever before. Let's use them. Another streamlining recommendation involves the role that religious broadcasters can play in helping charities in their communities or around the world, including in times of crisis, proposing increased flexibility for charitable fundraising. The report also states that we should be vigilant about removing barriers to innovation and online entrepreneurship and news gathering and information sharing. One barrier is cost. Ensuring that more public information is available online not only helps citizens directly, it also reduces the costs of reporting and journalism. Research and reporting that previously would have taken a reporter weeks a month can be done in days or faster. Another barrier to online entrepreneurship in the news and information area is America's broadband deployment and adoption gaps. The principle of universal access to information goes back to the early years of our republic. In 1832, newspapers accounted for 95% of the weight carried by the Postal Service, and those newspapers, as Commissioner Copps pointed out, received a discount for postage. The primary news delivery mechanisms of the past, newspapers, radio, and television, were all universal. The emerging news delivery mechanism of the future, broadband, of course should be too. Doing so would have multiple benefits, bringing the vast information that's on the internet to all people. And another benefit is the potential for improving the business models of online news and information entrepreneurs. To get to 100% broadband adoption in the United States from where we are today would represent a 50% increase in the online audience. The larger the online market, the greater the scale, the more likely a news and information online business can succeed. Moving more public information online will help promote broadband adoption, more broadband subscribers, a larger broadband base for advertising. These and other measures to increase broadband adoption will help improve online business models for news and information entrepreneurs, spurring new innovation and increasing broadband demand. This is a virtuous cycle that will help news businesses in the U.S. and help all Americans participate in both our democracy and our economy. As you all have seen this morning, Steve Waldman and his team have produced an incredibly thorough and thoughtful report, one that has done a huge service by deepening our understanding of how technology is affecting the information needs of communities. It provides a roadmap for a wide variety of players, including the FCC, to understand the media and information landscape and to take sensible action to fill important gaps. This issue is essential to the health of our democracy, and I look forward to working with my colleagues to act on its recommendations. With that, Mr. Waldman and team, I thank you again on behalf of all of us very much. We appreciate your work and your service. Thank you. With that, let me ask my colleagues if there are any announcements today. Commissioner Copps?
I've got a few interns I would like to introduce, if I could do so. I trust they're still here. Hope they're still here. First is James Mangasser, who's a second-year law student at Georgetown University, a history BA. That's a wonderful degree to have, from Syracuse University. Has some Hill experience with our friend Senator Maria Cantwell, doing legislative work for her, and also interned for Jay Inslee. Before that, he's been a volunteer sportscaster for an NPR affiliate in Syracuse. He's an Eagle Scout, and as a father of one of those, that's a high distinction. James, where are you? Stand up so people can see you. There he is. Todd Watson is second-year law at George Washington Law School. He already has a master's degree in journalism from New York University. Spent time in the Middle East writing for a magazine. Worked also at ABC News. Has worked as a paralegal and a director of marketing for a bank, and back in his native Arkansas, so he has quite a background. Todd's back there. Where's Todd? There he is. And finally, David Van Fleet Bloys, we'll just call him Van for purposes of today, has a BA from Georgetown in art history. Maybe he can get us some better pictures for our front office. I don't know, that would be nice. He will be getting his JD from American University next May. He has worked at the Corcoran, at the Polo Ralph Lauren, at the Motion Picture Association of America, and as a fellow in the Legal Rhetoric Department of the Washington College of Law. And he's even done some acting and is also, I am told, a fine chef. So maybe we'll find out. So this is a renaissance group for the 21st century that we have in the COPS office this summer, and there's more to come, but I'm happy to welcome them. Van, did you stand up? There he is. And those are my announcements.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, law clerks. Law clerks. We have law clerks. So in no particular order, Jonathan, would you like to stand up? So I'd like to introduce Jonathan Pearl, who's at New York Law School, where he's staff editor of the Media Law and Policy Journal. He's also a graduate of Yeshiva University, where he majored in business and management. Last summer, he was a telecommunications law fellow, and I imagine a jolly good one, at CTIA. He has worked for a law firm in Tel Aviv, Israel, and he is the founder and president of Bloggers Solutions for a New Century. So welcome, Jonathan. We also have Gibson Wright. Gibson, would you like to stand? Thanks. Gibson is a law student at Washington Lee University, where he is lead articles editor of the Washington and Lee Law Review, the long-esteemed, old-established W&L Law Review. Undergrad, he went to Princeton, where he has a degree in history. He worked last summer in the office of the Attorney General of the Commonwealth of Virginia. And speaking of Renaissance man, he was a bass in the Princeton University Glee Club a few years ago. So maybe we can have a little a cappella group of some sort. We can talk about what their name could be later. Megan Goldner, would you like to stand up? Megan is currently at the University of Texas School of Law, and she is her undergrad institution is Bucknell University, where she majored in political science. She also studied at the School for International Training in Morocco. She was a public policy analyst intern a while ago with DC Learns. Is that am I pronouncing that right? Okay. Where she conducted adult literacy study in accordance with Mayor Adrian Fenty's literacy initiative. So welcome. And then Chris Cook. Christopher, please stand up. He is currently at the University of Colorado Law School under the tutelage of one Preston Padden, who many of us know here in this room. He is the articles editor for the Journal on Telecommunications and High-Tech Law. Undergrad, he was at the University of Miami, where he majored in political science and psychology with a minor in business, so you were very busy. You studied abroad at the University of Essex, which ironically is not in Essex, it's in Colchester in the UK, something I learned today. But he's also worked in the Colorado Office of the Attorney General, among many, many other things. So it's been a long meeting. They have proven themselves as having bladders of steel. I just wanted to add that. So, good training. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's it.
Commissioner Clyburn.
I still haven't gotten used to following him, I'm telling you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to introduce our summer intern class, all third-year law students. Eva Marie Torres, if you would please stand. She is attending Syracuse University School of Law with a focus on communications law. She's a member and editor-in-chief of the International Law Society Student Association, and last summer she completed an interesting internship at the Institute for National Security and Counterterrorism. We can find out if she could talk about that later. Jonathan Whitaker, if you would stand, is from the Benjamin and Cardozo School in New York. He's a member of the Sports and Entertainment Law Student Association and the events chair of the Black Student Law Association, a Black Law Student Association. I think it's called, is it BALSA? Yeah, I haven't forgotten everything. Last summer he interned with Judge George Daniels of the U.S. District Court in New York. And Nathaniel T.D. Brown, had to say that, is from Boston College Law School, and that is involved in the Intellectual Property and Technology Forum, and will be a member of the 2011-12 Boston College Immigration Law Moot Court team. He researched case law on statutory interpretation for Professor Daniel Lyons at Boston College Law School. Thank you and welcome to you all.
Thank you. Welcome to all of the interns. I have a couple of announcements. First, I'd like to say a few words about Steve Van Rokel, who will be leaving the commission to join USAID as Executive Director of Citizen and Organizational Engagement. When I became chairman, I set a goal of making the commission a model of excellence in government. No one at the FCC has done more to bring that vision closer to reality than Steve. These are just some of Steve's accomplishments in the last 2 years. He led the launch of a groundbreaking new web platform for citizen participation in the work of the FCC, giving us the largest following of a federal agency on Twitter, making us the first agency to accept public comments on proceedings using Web 2.0 technologies. He reimagined the FCC website, serving consumers in a new way and developing our soon-to-be-launched my.fcc.gov site to personalize the FCC web experience for industry and advocates. He grew the FCC's capabilities and headcount without an increase in the agency's budget, modernizing our infrastructure, and some of you may be watching this via live stream online that Steve made possible. He led an effort to modernize the way citizens, industry, and developers interact with government data and launched the first federal developer website, as well as some innovative products to help us collect data, like our mobile speed test application, an effort applauded by no less than Steve Jobs. Steve helped make the FCC the most improved place to work in the federal government, according to a 2010 OPM survey, and netted us a Partnership for Public Service Best Places to Work award. Steve also helped bring an influx of new talent to the agency, economists, engineers, and IT and social media professionals, again, all without increasing the FCC budget. It's a very good thing that Steve has brought in such a great team. Many of them, and I see some of them in the room today, will be stepping up to continue the work that they've been doing under Steve's leadership and to take bigger leadership roles. Steve has just a tremendous record here, to say the least, following a tremendous record of success in more than a decade and a half in the private sector. We're very lucky that Steve joined the FCC 2 years ago. We're so grateful to Steve Van Rokel for all of his hard work here at the Commission. I know that I speak on behalf of all of us in thanking you for your service. We're glad that you're staying in public service and that you're going to bring some of the talents that you've honed here to the important work of USAID. The country, again, is grateful for your service, and we thank you. I'd like to welcome Ruth Milkman back to the chairman's office, where she will serve as special counsel to the chairman for innovation in government. I saw Ruth here somewhere before. There you are. We all know Ruth, who for the last 2 years has been the exceptionally effective chief of our Wireless Bureau. The Wireless Bureau has flourished, Ruth, under your leadership, freeing up spectrum for mobile broadband, ensuring that consumers have access to mobile broadband regardless of where they travel, laying the groundwork for voluntary incentive auctions. As Bureau Chief, Ruth has surrounded herself with talent, recognized good ideas regardless of their source, and engaged in the highest level of collaboration with her fellow Bureau and office chiefs. She's done it all with a sense of humor, some of that, as we all know, under very difficult circumstances, and we're grateful for that. I'm very pleased that Ruth has elected to take on this new role with its important responsibilities. I've known Ruth for a very long time. We're very, very lucky to have her at the FCC in any role. We appreciate the incredible work you've done over the last 2 years, and we're looking forward to your achievements and accomplishments in the months and years ahead. I'd like to extend my thank you to Rick Kaplan, who will succeed Ruth as chief of the Wireless Bureau. Rick has been a tremendous asset to the Commission, starting here shortly before I did, at least on this round, with becoming deputy coordinator of the DTV transition, which thanks to Commissioner Copps and the other commissioners went extremely well. Rick was chief of staff to Commissioner Clyburn and helped Commissioner Clyburn get off to such an effective start. And of course, I've been lucky to have you as my chief counsel in the chairman's office for some time, and I've been able to watch up close with you, as I have with Ruth, round-the-clock dedication, sensitivity to the complexity of issues that come before the Commission, deep insight. You've made the Commission's work better. You've served the public very, very well. We'll miss your leadership in the Chairman's office, but it's hardly a loss at all, because it's not only the Wireless Bureau's gain, it's the Commission's gain. It's the gain for all of us in such an important area. Rick, your step-by-step advance at the Commission has been just great. I'm pleased to have played a role in that, and I know you'll do a fantastic job as Chief of the Wireless Bureau. And I know the order here doesn't always work well, but I know all my colleagues join me both in congratulating you, Rick, you, Ruth, Steve Van Rokel as well. I suspect that ending the meeting is the better part of valor at this stage. And so with that, this meeting is adjourned, and thank you all very much.
We're going to do this the same way we did last time. If you could ask one question only, and no follow-ups, and introduce yourself in case, we always remember your names, but just for the record. Thank you very much.
And thank you all for your patience.
So,
Hi.
First, John.
Morning, good afternoon, good evening.
Good afternoon. I do have a two-parter on the future media report.
Go ahead.
But I'll start with the first part. Going back, kind of a retrospective question. Anything you might have done differently in terms of setting expectations for the report? There had been the expectation it would come out last year, and then just anything over the past week or couple of weeks you might have done differently to publicize and promote the report so that the FCC would have sort of pre-announced that this would be the meeting where the full report would be unveiled?
The answer to your first question is no. And on the second, I was under the impression that there was notice that would be at this meeting, but I'll have to look into that further.
Josh, next question.
A little bit more what you think the role of this reporter or how it will guide you. I mean, a lot of it seemed to focus on like the print media, et cetera, which is kind of out of the FCC's realm of authority. I mean, in a more concrete sense, where do you think this guides your policy making?
Sure. So the as I mentioned earlier today, we took this up after a bipartisan commission. The Knight Commission recommended that we look into issues raised by technology and the information needs of communities, and an agency that's focused on broadband and that in the media space, as Steve mentioned today, has various rules and regulations that affect the media business. It made sense to me then, and it makes sense to me now, that the Commission should be assessing the landscape, understanding what's working, what's not working, and considering whether there are any steps, whether there are problems, and whether there are any steps to take. As you saw, the report concluded that in many, many respects the news is good, that the internet and broadband is leading to great vibrancy and innovation and entrepreneurship when it comes to news and information, but that there are some issues around local reporting. And it suggested what I thought were a set of thoughtful and practical steps that could be taken, some by the Commission, some outside, in the context of a recognition that one, as the report said, the government is not the main player in this drama. Two, that the First Amendment is a very big player in this story. But that three, that there are some sensible steps to look at, including expanding universal broadband, making sure that public information is online in ways that are searchable, accessible to citizens and reporters to get more information out and to lower the costs of news gathering.
Great, thanks. Brooks?
Brooks Bolick, and since we're all about disclosure today, I'm with Politico Pro, which I understand is available in the building now. And I'm one of those new models. You should go pro if you're really serious about keeping journalists employed. Does this mean that media concentration is a dead issue at this agency?
No, we have a media ownership review that is in the works. As you know, we have an obligation on a regular basis to review ownership rules. We're in that cycle now. I think this report will help inform the media ownership review, and of course the Media Bureau is doing other work to gather the necessary facts and data to see, to assess the media ownership rules and whether or not changes should be made.
Great, thanks. Bill?
Afternoon, Mr. Chairman. Want to get your generic response? I'm sorry?
What is on your computer?
My daughter's stickers. Thank you for noticing. She'll be very pleased. There's a SpongeBob on there. That's mine. Did you have any other questions? I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman. You can ask a follow-up if you like.
No, it's okay. Go ahead.
Thank you. Your generic response to the Supreme Court's decision in the Talk America case this morning, and also specifically whether you can address Justice Scalia's concern that the FCC might start using amicus briefs as a backdoor way of re-regulating issues that they've already lost on.
Well, I'm gratified that the FCC's position was upheld and that the court's opinion recognized the important role that the FCC plays as an expert agency in this area. I'll have to get back to you on the Justice Scalia point because I have not read that yet.
Thank you so much. That's
I couldn't answer anything. I haven't read it yet, but we'll get back to you.
Would you like my daughter to bring you some stickers, Mr. Chairman?
I have a sticker-bringing daughter myself, so I think my sticker stock is full.
Thank you for noticing.
Anyway, you know, I think he's right. Go ahead. I feel bad about.
Hello. Hi. Thanks. Just for the second part of the question on the policy side. What's your vision?
Oh, I see. That was your fault. Oh, so it was a two-parter followed by another part.
You got it.
Very true. That is not allowed. But go ahead.
I guess I'm going to break the rule then.
Got to read the fine print with Com Daily, Mr. Chairman.
What's your vision for what should happen with the cable leased access regime, since that's something that the report does mention?
I wish I could give you a fully thought-out answer, and the answer is it's something that I think, as the report says, should be looked at, considered in view of the changing landscape. But I don't have. I'm tempted to give you another question because I don't have a fully thought-through view on that.
Thank you.
So, with apologies, now the people.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We'll now proceed to Part 2, the staff press conference on the agenda item, and the Wireline Bureau, Sharon Gillett from the Wireline Bureau. Yes, Bill?
Did you have a question?
My question is, I want to understand it. So now CLEX and RLEX just have the same opportunity that the ILEX have had for a number of years to file electronically?
Right. It's CLEX and long-distance carriers. I'm not sure what you mean by RLEC.
Rural.
Rural LECs are incumbent LECs.
Thank you.
So they would already have been filing electronically.
So, but this, how many companies does this affect? I mean, theoretically.
Hundreds, yeah.
Okay, and why did it take so long to get, I mean, why did it take so long to get here?
Well, I mean, I think originally.
Can you come up to the mic?
Okay. I mean, originally when the commission.
My dear saintly mother's watching this news conference, so get on the microphone.
Right. Originally, when the commission instituted ETFS, there were two reasons they didn't include non-dominant carriers. The first was that there was a concern about capacity. It was a different era where there were more capacity concerns. And then the second policy reason was at that time they were considering a proceeding to completely de-tariff IXEs, and so those were the two reasons. So it wasn't done initially in 1998, and a number of inter-exchange services were de-tariffed. Most of them were, but CLEX still do file tariffs for access charges and for there are certain other exceptions to the de-tariffing rules. So it was something when this chairman came into office, we were tasked with looking at our processes, and this was something that seemed ripe to do.
So what specifically got moved around? What furniture got moved around to make this happen? I'm just curious.
Well, we had to do some changes. We're in the process of making some changes to ETFS. You know, we had to look at the rules, do a number of rule changes, but I mean, it was something that that was sort of instituted by the chairman when he wanted, you know, he had tasked everyone to look at our processes and try to come up with ways to make the commission act more efficiently.
If I could
I'm sorry.
answer that with a very short answer.
Yes.
It hasn't, in '98, there were good reasons not to do it. Between then and now, it wasn't a priority for any previous chairman. It is a priority now to streamline and make the commission's processes more efficient. It requires IT infrastructure changes to accommodate the additional tariffs in ETFS, so there's work behind the scenes that has to happen in order to make this work. But it's a priority to make things work more efficiently, so that's what we're doing.
Thank you. Enjoy your sandwich.
Great.
Okay, thank you. That was the only item on the agenda, so we'll conclude the press conference.